Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a life where the winters are endless, the breadlines are longer than your patience, and the only acceptable opinion is the one you don't say out loud. You're about to live a full day in the Soviet Union, not as a tourist, not as a spy, but as a regular, slightly sleepy citizen. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, not because of any dramatic danger, but just from sheer greyness and bureaucratic exhaustion. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. Also, let me know what city you're watching from and what time it is. I always find it fun to imagine this sleepy little history club spread out across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the hiss and click of the radiator, that oddly comforting noise that tells you it's still working, sort of. Your Khrushchyovka, the 5-story grey concrete apartment block gifted to you by the state, groans as the building settles. It's 6:45 a.m, still dark, always dark. Through the single-pane window you see a blurry curtain of snow falling gently onto the iron railings of the stairwell outside. The glass is frosted around the edges, and when you breathe near it, your breath fogs up what little view you had. There's a smell in the air, vaguely metallic, slightly damp, but layered beneath that is something heartier. Buckwheat porridge from the neighbour's stove. The walls are paper thin, and you can hear her clanging around, talking to her cat like it's her husband, who's either long gone or just never existed. You can't remember which. Your room is small, 10 square metres, shared with your snoring cousin who works nights at the trolley depot. Your side of the room has a low wooden bed, a single shelf lined with worn books by Gorky and Tolstoy, and a dusty radio that hums even when it's off, probably listening more than broadcasting. There's also the small square of linoleum flooring that's peeling in one corner, revealing cracked concrete underneath. You slip your feet into stiff wool socks and shuffle to the tiny kitchen shared with 2 other families. Someone's already claimed the stove and you'll have to wait for your turn, unless you want to start a cold war over tea. The window over the sink is frosted on the inside, and the curtain is a once yellow rag now faded into Soviet beige. A cockroach skitters across the counter, but you don't bother to chase it. It's probably lived here longer than you have. The samovar is warm. Bless the babushka down the hall who keeps it going. You pour a cup of weak black tea, drop in a sugar cube, just one, you're rationing, and lean against the wall. The warmth seeps into your fingers. You look at the calendar, October 1906. The little red star marks today as some minor local celebration, but you don't remember what. All the holidays blur together when they involve standing outside for hours waving flags you didn't choose. You sip your tea and remember your dream, something about swimming in a pool of oranges. You haven't seen a real orange since 1969, when your uncle brought one back from a trip to Georgia. It was bitter and expensive, but the smell of it clung to your hands for a whole day. You don't talk about things like that. Longing is dangerous. Getting dressed is like preparing for battle. The layers come first, thermal underwear, a woolen sweater knitted by your aunt, then your coat. It's heavy and smells like the attic, but it keeps out most of the wind. Your shoes, on the other hand, are a lost cause. You've patched them so many times they're practically leather origami. The walk to work will be cold, wet, and probably involve stepping in a puddle that looks shallow, but hides an entire second puddle beneath it. As you zip your coat, you glance at the mirror. It's foggy, cracked in one corner, and taped together with a strip of newspaper. You stare at yourself, tired, a little grey around the eyes, even though you're barely in your 30s. This is what life looks like when everything's technically free, but nothing is easy. Outside, the staircase is icy. You hold onto the chipped metal railing as you descend. On the 3rd floor, the drunk from 2B is asleep in the corner again. He mumbles something about gay Garin, and then snores louder than the neighbour's television. You step over him and keep going. The courtyard is quiet except for the crunch of your boots in the snow. Somewhere a dog barks, but you can't see it. Smoke curls up from chimneys. The sky is flat and grey like someone painted it there with a broom. A group of school children passes you in uniform, their hats pulled low and scarves wrapped tight. One of them waves a tiny red flag. Maybe it's Revolutionary Heroes Day, or maybe she just likes flags. There's a beauty in it, in a strange way. Not a postcard kind of beauty, but a muted rhythm. You know what every day will be like. The same walk, the same tea, the same sigh when you open your paycheck and see a number that feels more symbolic than useful. There's comfort in routine. You don't think about the outside world much, there's no point. You're not supposed to. Here's your quirky fact. Some families used to collect the foil from imported chocolate wrappers and smooth it out to line their drawers because it felt fancy. Like owning a piece of the West, but without the risk. And here's your historical fact for the night. Those Khrushchyovkas you live in, built under Nikita Khrushchev in the 1960s to replace overcrowded communal housing. Ugly, yes, but millions got their first private toilets thanks to them. That's progress, comrade. And here's the open scholarly debate. Some historians argue that life in the late Soviet period wasn't entirely bleak, just stable, predictable. Was that monotony a kind of safety net? Or just the velvet cage of a society that forgot how to dream? You wonder, but not too loudly. You turn the corner toward your factory. The smoke from its tall stacks disappears into the grey. Another day begins, and you're right on time, as always. You're not exactly sure what your factory makes anymore. Some days it's gears for tractors, other days it might be light bulbs or engine parts. Depends on who signed which paper up top, but it doesn't matter. You've worked here for 12 years, and the machines still make the same noise, the same oil leaks from the same crack under press 7, and your supervisor still smells like pickled herring and lectures people for showing up exactly 1 minute late. This morning the building greets you with its usual scent: diesel, old metal, and instant coffee someone spilled last week. You clock in by signing a logbook, because even though there's a punch card machine, it hasn't worked since Brezhnev sneezed on it during a tour in '72. You head to your workstation where the lights flicker like they're nervous, and the heater works only on Tuesdays. Your gloves are stiff with yesterday's grease, and you slap them against your leg a few times to soften them up. You settle in. For the next 8 hours, you'll be feeding steel rods into a clunking hydraulic cutter that's about as precise as a blindfolded goat. You used to complain. Then someone told you quietly that the guy who complained before you got transferred to a factory in the Urals, nobody really knows what they make there, but apparently it's cold and involves more goats. The machinery rumbles to life, coughing smoke like it resents being woken up. You get into the rhythm. Insert rod, pull lever, duck slightly in case the thing jumps again. It did last week and nearly broke your nose. Across the floor, your co-worker Valera waves at you. His face is soot-smeared already, and he's got that sleepy grin that says he was up too late playing dominoes and drinking kvass with his father-in-law. Around 10 a.m, the first major event of the day happens. Someone yells "Chleb bread," and the line forms instantly near the break room. The cafeteria lady got a delivery, a single crate of rye loaves. You shuffle into the queue with everyone else. There's no real order, just this unwritten understanding that whoever looks the most determined probably gets theirs. You spend 40 minutes standing under a flickering light, waiting for your turn to buy bread that might already be gone by the time you reach the front. You can't leave though. It's not just food, it's bread. It's half your dinner, your next breakfast, maybe even part of lunch if you stretch it. And besides, this is where all the best gossip gets exchanged. The guy in front of you is whispering about a cousin who came back from Hungary with a cassette tape of Queen. He says the guitar sounds like thunder and magic. The woman behind you mutters that she once saw a banana in '64. She didn't get to eat it, but she still remembers the smell. You all nod, a little wistful. When it's finally your turn, the lady behind the counter doesn't even look up. She shoves a loaf across the table and barks, "Next!" You cradle it like it's made of gold, wrap it in a torn bit of newspaper, and tuck it safely into your coat. Victory. Back on the factory floor, everyone's a little happier after bread. Someone turns on the radio, and you hear a faint pop song about tractors and love, standard fare. You work until lunch, then sit on an upside-down bucket with your lunch tin. Inside, 2 boiled potatoes, a slice of salted cucumber, and a thin piece of mystery meat. Could be beef, could be hope. Valera sits next to you and shares a story about his brother's neighbour who heard about a guy arrested for hoarding sugar. 5 kilos of it, hidden in a hollow wall. You both shake your heads like it's scandalous, but secretly you're impressed. You wouldn't even know where to get 5 kilos of sugar. The afternoon drags. The cutter jams twice, and you pretend to fix it by whacking it with a wrench and swearing softly. It works. Probably afraid of you now. That's how relationships work here. With machines, people, and the system itself. Pretend you're in charge, act like you know what you're doing, and it usually doesn't fall apart. Usually. By 4:30, your back aches. Your hands are sore, your tea thermos is empty, and you've inhaled enough metal dust to give your lungs their own industrial career. But the end is in sight. You sign out, say goodbye to Valera, and step back into the snow. It's darker now, somehow even greyer than this morning. You consider stopping by the store on the way home, but then remember it's Tuesday. Tuesdays are for disappointment. The store gets shipments on Wednesdays, and by then the line will start forming before sunrise. Still, you try. The little grocery near your apartment has its lights on. Inside, a few tired souls are browsing half-empty shelves. You walk in, greeted by the smell of pickled everything. The produce section is a sad little display of wrinkled carrots and one cabbage that looks like it gave up. There's no milk, no butter, but there is a jar of mustard. You stare at it for a moment and then decide, yes, tonight your family will have mustard. A luxury. At the counter, the woman rings it up slowly, hands trembling. She's older than the USSR itself, probably. Behind her, a handwritten sign says, "No cigarettes until Friday, don't ask." You don't. You pay, thank her, and leave. You walk home with your bread, your mouths in a mustard, and your breath making little clouds in front of your face. The sky's turning a deeper grey, almost blue if you squint. There's a strange quiet in the air, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. Here's your historical fact for the evening. In the Soviet Union, rationing of basic food items like meat and butter continued well into the 80s in many regions, despite official reports claiming abundance. And the quirky one? People would save plastic bags from foreign products, wash, dry, and reuse them endlessly. A single Western grocery bag could become a family heirloom. As for the debate, some scholars argue that these long chaotic queues weren't just about scarcity, they were about control. A subtle way of keeping people too busy, too distracted, too worn down to organise or question. Others say it fostered strange forms of community. In line, people talked, shared, bonded. Was the breadline a prison or a peculiar social net? You unlock your building door with your cold-numbed fingers, step inside, and let the warmth and the soft scent of cabbage welcome you back. You're back in the flat, and it's dim but not unpleasant. The hallway smells like boiled something. Potatoes? Cabbage? Maybe both. You slip off your boots, careful not to track slush across the faded rug, and drop the loaf of bread on the table like it's a trophy from some harrowing expedition. Your cousin grunts from the other room, either asleep or pretending to be. You think about waking him just to brag about the mustard, but decide to let him dream his factory dreams undisturbed. The kitchen is, generously speaking, tiny. You can open the fridge and the cabinet at the same time without moving your feet. The fridge hums like it's thinking too hard, and it's mostly empty except for a half jar of pickles, a chunk of cheese wrapped in wax paper, and a glass container of grey stew that nobody has touched since Sunday. You add the mustard, next to the pickles. Looks better already. Dinner tonight will be humble. Some boiled potatoes from the sack under the sink, a bit of the bread you scored, and maybe, if you're lucky, a spoonful of smetana left from last week. You light the stove, watching the little blue flame flicker to life, and set a pot of water on to boil. The sound of heating water is oddly soothing, like the day finally exhaling. You move through your evening routine on autopilot, change into house clothes, check the mailbox, just bills and an outdated flyer for a meeting about fertilizer, and turn on the little transistor radio in the corner of the kitchen. It crackles, sputters, then finally lands on a voice reciting agricultural data in an impressively lifeless tone. You leave it on anyway. Silence feels risky, like something that might draw suspicion. You take a seat at the kitchen table, wipe off some mystery crumbs with your sleeve, and begin slicing the bread with deliberate care. The crust is dense, the kind of bread that could double as a self-defense weapon, but it's fresh, and that's more than you can say most days. You spread a paper-thin smear of mustard on one piece. Luxury. You eat slowly, savouring every bite like it's some 5-star Parisian course, even though you've never been west of the Dniester River. The window above the sink fogs slightly as the pot boils. Snow continues to fall, now heavier, like the sky just gave up and dumped a bucket of it all at once. You watch it in silence, imagining that somewhere, on the other side of this massive country, someone else is watching this same snowfall, wondering the same things. Will there be meat this week? Will the electricity hold through the night? Will we ever get colour television? You wash your dish in cold water because the hot tap is, once again, on strike. It's like living with a moody teenager. You never know what version of your plumbing you'll get. The sponge has seen better decades. You hang it to dry and wipe your hands on the kitchen towel, which is also a repurposed curtain. Nothing gets thrown away unless it's truly dead, and even then, it gets buried with respect. After dinner, you sit by the window in the living room door, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of mothballs and old cigarettes. The radiator hisses again, louder this time. Maybe it's angry. Maybe it's just tired of being a radiator in the Soviet Union. You get it. You stare at the snowy street below. A lone figure walks across the courtyard, bundled head to toe, carrying a plastic bag that swings with the weight of something rare. Maybe tangerines, maybe toilet paper. Either way, a triumph. There's something about these evenings, dull, repetitive, and oddly comforting. This is when your thoughts get dangerous, though. When there's nothing to distract you, you start wondering what things might be like if, things were different. If the shops were full, if the news told the truth, if you could say what you wanted without your neighbour arching an eyebrow and making a mental note. But these are questions you bury deep, under layers of routine and survival. Quirky fact break: did you know people used to use empty perfume bottles as home decor? Not because they were fancy smelling, no one could afford to actually spray them, but because Western packaging looked exotic. A bottle of French cologne with half a drop left was worth more than a painting. You get up and turn on the television. Not because you want to, but because it's part of the ritual. There's one channel. It's the same anchor from yesterday and the day before, reading headlines like he's trying not to fall asleep. Agricultural production up. Everyone are doing great. Lenin's still a good guy. You could recite it yourself by now, but tonight there's ballet. The Bolshoi Theatre is performing Swan Lake again. That's the emergency default for state television. It's what they play when something important is happening that they're not ready to talk about. You watch for a minute, the dancers spinning like ghosts in feathers, and wonder, what is happening? The historical fact of the evening: Soviet citizens spent, on average, 4 to 5 hours a week queuing in lines by the 1980s. That's over 200 hours a year. A full work month, just waiting. For food, for soap, for shoes that didn't squeak. And here's the debate. Some people say Soviet citizens were apathetic, beaten down by the system into chore or dull obedience. But others argue that wasn't apathy. It was adaptation, a quiet form of resistance. You learn to make peace with boredom. You learn to find joy in small absurd victories, like getting a mustard jar, or having all your light bulbs working at the same time. You turn off the TV, the room now dark except for the soft orange glow of the street lamp outside. You stretch. Your bones crack in protest. The day has taken its toll, but there's something satisfying about the weariness. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from chaos, but the heavy-lidded sort that comes from routine, grinding, predictable, and strangely comforting. You pour one last cup of tea, more water than flavour now, and let it warm your hands as you sit back down. The wind whistles faintly at the window. Somewhere above you a neighbour coughs. Somewhere below a baby cries. All part of the lullaby. You sip, and for a moment, you allow yourself a thought. Maybe it's not much of a life, but it is a life. And here that's enough. Morning again, or at least some approximation of it. It's hard to tell with the perpetual cloud cover and the sun playing hard to get. You wake to the familiar chorus, pipes clanking, a door slamming 2 floors down, and the rhythmic hacking cough of the guy in 4A who smokes like he's in a race with death and losing beautifully. The radiator is alive today, buzzing with faint heat like it's feeling generous. Your cousin's already gone, left you a note that says something about an early shift and not to eat the last pickle. You never intended to, but now you kind of want to out of spite. The floor is cold under your feet, even with socks. You shuffle to the hallway like a sleepy mammoth and peer into the kitchen. It's your turn to clean the stovetop. A sentence so boring it could kill a bird mid-flight, and yet, in this place, it's the kind of thing people really get worked up about. Someone left burnt milk crusted on the coils. Could be the woman from 2C, could be the man who insists on boiling fish at 6 a.m. every Tuesday. You'll never know. You spray a bit of vinegar water, scrub like you're sanding paint off a tank, and then rinse with water colder than your ambitions. Breakfast is modest. Black bread toasted on the burner, a dab of lard, and hot tea that's more hot than tea. You eat standing up, eyes drifting toward the window where a man is already dragging a crate of coal across the courtyard. He walks like someone whose knees gave up 2 decades ago but forgot to tell the rest of him. You respect it. You throw on your work clothes, The same faded overalls and coat that have survived both frostbite and fashion. There's a patch on the elbow stitched in with thread from a different decade. The boots are still damp from yesterday, but you shove your feet in anyway. They squelch like dying frogs. Off you go, back into the Soviet wilderness. Today isn't a factory day, though. It's meeting day. You forgot until just now. You curse under your breath in a way that won't alert the nosy neighbour whose hearing is somehow more advanced than state surveillance. The glorious Monday work planning and morale meeting, yes, that's the real name, probably decided after 6 hours of deliberation, starts at 9 sharp in the break room. You arrive 5 minutes early because 5 minutes late is a rumour that follows you to your grave. The room smells like bad coffee and worse intentions. There's a chalkboard with a crooked map of the USSR, some inspirational slogans pinned up with thumbtacks, and one lonely fern that gave up on photosynthesis last year, but remains for morale. Your supervisor, Comrade Petrovov, stands at the front with a clipboard, and the eternal frown of a man who peaked emotionally during the Stalin era. You sit in your usual spot, back row, far left, right under the ceiling leak. You take out a pencil that barely qualifies as a pencil anymore and pretend to take notes as Petrov drones about quotas, production targets, and the glorious efforts of Comrade Sidorova, who discovered a way to reduce waste in Gear Assembly Unit B. Everyone claps, loudly, uniformly, mechanically. Cool. You clap too, even though you're pretty sure Comrade Sidorova spends most of her day knitting under the conveyor belt. A colleague nudges you. He whispers that his cousin smuggled in a Swiss chocolate bar and that it tasted like angels crying. You nod, eyes still on Petrov, and pretend you didn't just salivate slightly. A chocolate bar, real one from Switzerland? That's practically contraband. You haven't had real chocolate since the last Winter Olympics. After an hour and a half, the meeting moves into Cultural Enlightenment segment, which is a 5-minute poetry reading about collective farming and 2 accordion songs played from a crackling cassette. You don't remember voting for any of this, but here you are. You wonder if Petrov actually believes any of it, or if he just learned long ago that belief was optional, but performance was not. Here's your quirky fact for today. Some workers used to bring potato sacks to meetings so they could discreetly knit or peel during the more enlightenment-heavy parts. Nobody said anything as long as the clapping happened on cue. You all sign your names in a ledger to prove attendance and shuffle back to your posts. The factory floor is mercifully loud, drowning out the hum of ideology with the grind of metal on metal. You return to your machine where everything makes sense, input, output, repeat. The machine doesn't care about quotas or politics. It just wants not to explode. You can relate. By noon, your mind is back in the rhythm. Metal, lever, wipe, repeat. Lunch is the same. Bread, soup, and gossip. Someone claims the KGB raided a hair salon last week because they were hiding Beatles records under the floorboards. Another says the mayor's son got caught hoarding foreign cigarettes and was reassigned to Siberia. Nobody really knows if these stories are true, but everyone retells them like sacred scripture. Truth is flexible. Rumours are eternal. Now here's the historical fact. During the Soviet era, clapping at meetings was often expected to continue for minutes at a time. There were actual incidents where no one wanted to be the first to stop clapping for fear of being labelled disloyal. One such applause reportedly lasted over 10 minutes before someone fainted, mercifully ending the performance. And the open scholarly debate? Some historians argue that these forced meetings and rituals weren't just about indoctrination. They were psychological theatre, a way to create a constant low-grade tension, a shared performance that bound everyone in silent complicity. Others say the meetings became so routine, so absurd that they lost all impact and turned into background noise, more annoying than oppressive. By the time your shift ends, your hands are aching, your knees are threatening a strike, and your ears are still ringing from the press machine. Outside, it's snowing again, bigger flakes this time, soft and slow like a lullaby for concrete buildings. You walk home with the kind of tired that lives in your bones, not your muscles. At the front door, you nod to the old woman sweeping the steps. She nods back without a word. And you both acknowledge the sacred bond of surviving another workday without swearing aloud or defecting. You reach your flat, unwrap your scarf, and collapse onto the couch like a sack of potatoes that just lost its will to be useful. The ceiling creaks, the walls murmur, and somewhere a neighbour begins singing quietly. Off-key and beautiful, you made it. One more day, same as the last, and likely the next. But still, one more. You're barely home 5 minutes before the knock comes. Not loud, not frantic. Just 3 soft, calculated taps. The kind that say, "I'm not in a rush, but I know you're in there." You freeze mid-scarf removal, wondering who it is this time. Maybe the janitor again, wanting help with the basement pipe that bursts every February, or the lady from upstairs peddling stale kvass and unsolicited opinions, or worse, someone from work. You open the door a crack, just enough to see the familiar thick glasses and permanently raised eyebrows of Comrade Drozdeva. She's head of the building committee, or self-appointed head depending on who you ask, and she's always appearing like a puff of cold air that smells faintly of mothballs and moral superiority. She doesn't smile. She never does. "There's a community morale meeting this evening," she says, like it's a favour she's granting you. "Attendance is, of course, expected." She lets that final word float in the air a bit too long. Then she nods and disappears down the hall in her standard-issue orthopaedic slippers. You close the door and exhale through your nose. Morale meeting. Glorious. Another evening of pretending to care about bulletin boards and poster slogans, but not going as a gamble. Miss once and you get a warning, miss twice, and your name quietly disappears from recommended for promotion lists, even if no one knows what you're being promoted to. You eat a quick dinner, bread again, but toasted this time. Fancy. You scrape the bottom of the pickle jar for a last slice, then add it on top like a garnish. Your cousin is still not home, probably avoiding the meeting by working overtime or hiding in the maintenance tunnels. You envy him. You bundle back up and head downstairs. The communal meeting room is in the basement, damp, low-ceilinged, with exposed pipes and a dozen folding chairs that groan louder than the people sitting in them. You take a seat near the back, nodding at the usual faces. Mrs. Pavlova, whose cat controls the building with its glare. Old man Yuri, who hasn't spoken in 3 years but still shows up to everything. And of course, Comrade Drozdeva, standing near the front with her clipboard like she's guarding the secrets of the state. The meeting begins with the anthem, because of course it does. A wheezy recording crackles from an old tape deck, and everyone stands automatically. You murmur along, careful to get the words right. Even the old ones nobody remembers, especially those. Then come the announcements. A water shut-off tomorrow from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. for reasons nobody can explain. A poster painting contest for the upcoming Revolution Day celebrations. Suggested themes: unity, grain production, or the eternal son of Lenin. You nearly laugh at that last one, but suppress it with a cough. Then the floor opens for community feedback, which is code for vague complaints disguised as praise. A woman stands and says, "We appreciate the effort of our maintenance team. Though perhaps they could shovel more thoroughly." Everyone nods. The shoveling has been non-existent, but you can't say that out loud, not directly. Then it's your turn. Comrade Drozdeva calls your name and asks for your thoughts on the recent hallway painting initiative. You didn't know there was one. You stand, clear your throat and say, "The new shade of beige is inspiring." A few people clap. One guy coughs in what might be support. You sit back down. Crisis averted. Here's your quirky fact for the evening. Many Soviet buildings held mandatory sub-botniks, community cleaning days where residents were expected to sweep, scrub and paint their own public spaces. Unpaid, of course. Refusing was frowned upon, unless you had a signed note from your superior or a broken limb. As the meeting drags on, the air grows thicker. The pipes hiss above you like irritated snakes, and the walls sweat faintly with condensation. You wish someone would open a window, but doing so might be interpreted as weakness. Or worse, complaint. Comrade Drozdeva ends the meeting with a recitation of party slogans, each one met with a tired round of applause. "Our strength is in unity." Clap. "The future belongs to the worker." Clap. "Beware of Western influence." Slightly slower clap. Finally, you're dismissed. People file out quietly like survivors of some mild natural disaster. You climb the stairs 2 at a time just to get out of the humidity and back into the biting cold. The air outside tastes better, even if it's full of coal dust. Back in the apartment, you peel off your coat like a snake shedding a heavy woolen skin. Your cousin's returned, sitting on the couch reading Pravda with a smirk that says he knows exactly how dull your evening was. You throw your scarf at him. He laughs and tosses you the last tangerine, small and slightly squishy. A peace offering. You sit together quietly. The radiator hisses. The clock ticks. The smell of someone's burnt stew creeps in from the hallway. Your cousin eventually puts on a cassette tape of old Soviet jazz, surprisingly smooth, almost Western in its feel. For a moment, you both lean back and just listen. Not talk, not think, just let it play. Here's your historical fact. Soviet citizens were often required to participate in public political life, which included meetings, rallies, and voluntary but not really community projects. These events were carefully logged, and your participation could affect your job, housing, or access to better goods. And the open debate, did these mandatory gatherings actually build community, or were they just performative rituals, designed to keep everyone too busy and too watched to cause trouble? Some say it was both, a forced kind of togetherness, real but hollow, shared by people who knew it was fake and kept doing it anyway. Eventually you head to bed, tired in the way only collective enthusiasm can make you. The blanket is scratchy, the mattress lumpy, but it's yours. You pull it up to your chin, listening as the jazz fades and the snow thickens outside. Another day ends not with fanfare, but with a slow sinking sigh. You close your eyes, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a piece of you whispers, only 5 more days until the next meeting. And then you're asleep. The day begins with static. Not metaphorical, actual static. Your bedside radio hissing into your dreams until it finally grabs hold of the morning news, somewhere between a weather report and a story about tractor output in Kaluga. You pry one eye open. It's still dark. You check the clock, 6:12 a.m. The radiator isn't making any noise today. That's not great. You shuffle out from under your wool blanket, feet hitting the floor with a soft slap. The air is colder than usual, and the tip of your nose tells you the heating system has gone on strike. Again. You rub your hands together, blow into your palms, and make a slow, grumbling pilgrimage toward the kitchen. In the kitchen, you find your cousin sitting at the table in his coat, pouring hot water into a chipped enamel mug. He holds it like it's the last bit of warmth in the apartment. "No heat," he mutters, not looking up. You nod and move to the window, your breath fogging the glass as you peer out into the grey-blue early light. Everything is dusted in snow. The street lamp is still on, casting a hazy cone that illuminates the frozen sidewalk and a cat curled into a perfect ball on a manhole cover. "Should I call maintenance?" you ask, already knowing the answer. Your cousin laughs through his nose. "And get a response by next spring?" He takes a sip of tea and pulls his coat tighter. "I'll grab some wood for the stove at work later, smuggle it home in my bag and they won't notice. Or they will and they won't care." You boil water for your own tea, half listening to the radio announce the results of a local vote you didn't participate in, but apparently won by a landslide. You tear off a piece of bread, chew it without enthusiasm, and glance at the empty sugar jar on the counter. You turn it upside down, shake it like a maraca. Nothing. At 7:30, you head out into the cold. The air slaps your face like a disapproving grandmother. You wrap your scarf tighter and tuck your chin into your coat. The sidewalk is covered in snow that's already turning to grey slush, and you step carefully to avoid patches of ice camouflaged as sidewalk. A neighbour passes you on a sled, not riding it, just pulling it like a sad little wagon with 2 sacks of potatoes strapped to the back. Work today is less mechanical and more ceremonial. Word has gone out that there's going to be a visit, some mid-level party representative from the regional council, which means cleaning, organising, and most importantly pretending. You get pulled from your usual machine and given a rag and a bucket with instructions to make everything look more productive. So now you're wiping down a dusty filing cabinet in an office you've never been allowed in before. Valera appears beside you with a mop and shrugs. "I don't know what we're cleaning, but it's gonna sparkle," he says. "Even the rats are nervous." You spend the morning engaged in full theatre, staging parts, aligning toolboxes, sweeping floors that haven't seen daylight in years. The factory hums, but not with work. It hums with anticipation, fear, and the scent of lemon-scented disinfectant no one remembers ordering. A new flag has been hung in the entranceway. It's wrinkled but red enough. At 11:15 the official arrives, a man in a stiff overcoat and a hat that says, "I've never lifted anything heavier than a pen." He walks with an entourage of 2 secretaries and someone taking notes on a clipboard. Because of course. You and the others stand in position like mannequins, smiling, nodding, eyes full of fake enthusiasm. You even shake the man's hand. He smells like cologne and boredom. He asks you what you do here. You hesitate just slightly and then say, "I operate Machinery 7, overseeing the cutting of steel components for domestic agricultural equipment." He nods like he understands. He doesn't. Valera pipes in with something about worker unity, and someone else quotes Lenin. There's clapping. Too much clapping. Again, you can't feel your hands afterward. The group leaves, and within seconds the flag is taken down, the floor becomes a floor again, and everyone goes back to their real work, now behind schedule and 3 hours grumpier. You return to your station and feed steel rods into the machine, the rhythm dull and comforting. Lunch is quiet. Even Valera has nothing clever to say. You chew your sandwich slowly. Black bread, 1 slice of cheese, and an absurdly thin strip of sausage. You sip weak tea from your dented tin cup and try not to think too hard about the performance you just gave. You'd win an award if awards existed for pretending your workplace is a socialist utopia, but there's only one prize here. Keeping your head down long enough to retire before the machine eats your hand. Historical fact for today: Soviet workplace inspections were often announced in advance, giving workers and managers time to clean, stage results, and prepare scripted answers. Real working conditions were rarely, if ever, the focus. And the quirky fact? Factories sometimes kept one working prototype or finished product on hand nicknamed the golden sample to display during visits, while actual production remained far behind schedule or non-existent. Appearances always mattered more than output. Then there's the ongoing debate. Was this level of performative work deception or survival? Were people complicit in propping up a lie, or simply adapting to a system that rewarded illusion over truth? Some historians argue it was a form of quiet resistance, weaponizing the rules to serve the people, not the party. Others say it simply dulled the collective edge of the population, replacing purpose with pantomime. By 5 o'clock, the day has finally ground to a halt. You clock out, your gloves stiff with grease and dust. You and Valera exchange a tired nod. No words, just a shared understanding that you've both survived another round of theatre and labour. You trudge home through snow that's now slushy and filthy, your boots soaked through. The city feels muffled under the weight of winter, as if even the buildings are trying to sleep. You pause at the corner kiosk and buy a pack of matches and a small bag of salt. Bare essentials. The woman running the stall doesn't smile, you don't expect her to, and back at the apartment, your cousin is heating water on the stove, still bundled like an Arctic explorer. Maintenance says they'll fix the heat tomorrow, he says. They said that yesterday too. You light a candle for warmth more than light and sit near it with your hands cupped. The flame dances like it has secrets. The day ends the same way it always does, in layers. Layers of clothing, of thoughts, of fuss, of silence. You lie down, under your heavy blanket, still in your thermal shirt. Outside, the wind whistles past the window. A low, distant howl. You close your eyes. Another day survived. Barely warm, barely heard, but survived. The knock comes again. Not Drozdiva this time, thank whatever minor household spirit might be listening, but your neighbour, Genya. He leans in your doorway, hat still dusted with snow, his arms crossed like he's bracing for a question he hopes you won't ask. You don't say anything. You just gesture for him to come in, because in this building that's how it works. Doors stay unlocked more out of futility than trust. Privacy is something you pretend not to want. Genya closes the door behind him and stomps the snow off his boots. He's carrying a small jar. Inside it, a murky liquid that probably once had a purpose but now mostly smells like vinegar and anxiety. He holds it out. Trade? You raise an eyebrow. For what? He looks around your kitchen like it's a market stall, then spots the bag of salt you bought yesterday. Half of that. You almost laugh. Half a bag of salt for what's probably expired pickled mushrooms. But this is how it works. No shops, no receipts, just quiet, careful transactions. You nod and split the salt, pouring it into a folded scrap of wax paper. Genya leaves the jar on the table like a trophy. You sit back down and watch it. The mushrooms bob around like they're trying to swim away from their fate. You're not even sure they're mushrooms. Could be rubber. But you'll eat them anyway, probably with potatoes. Everything is with potatoes. The rest of the evening is filled with the usual background murmur. Someone arguing over the shared laundry schedule in the hallway, a toilet flushing 3 floors down that echoes like it's trying to escape, and your cousin muttering curses under his breath while darning his socks. You don't interrupt. Darning is serious work. It's either that or frostbite. Then, from the hallway, the unmistakable scent of frying onions. Not yours, of course, you haven't had an onion in 2 weeks. But someone scored big at the market. Maybe they knew someone. Maybe they just got lucky. You sit with your tea and inhale like it's a meal. Your stomach agrees too loudly. This is the rhythm of communal life. The hallway is as much a part of your home as your kitchen. People wander in and out, borrow things without asking, bring news whether you want it or not. You've had your socks stolen twice. One reappeared on a neighbour's clothesline months later, suspiciously your size but with a new patch stitched in. You let it go. The woman in apartment 3B stops by next. She's got her son with her, a snot-nosed kid with eyes too big for his face and a toy made from scrap wire and old bread clips. She asks if she can borrow your bucket. You hesitate. Buckets are valuable, but you nod and pass it over. She doesn't thank you. She just says, "We'll bring it back before Sunday," and disappears. You're pretty sure you won't see it again. The bucket is now in its third life. Later you go down to the shared bathroom. Not yours, this one's on the second floor. The one on your level is clogged again. No one wants to claim responsibility, which means no one's going to fix it. The hallway smells faintly of damp plaster and cabbage. You hold your breath as you pass the suspicious stain that's been growing on the ceiling since spring. The bathroom is unlocked and miraculously empty. You flip the light switch. Nothing. Of course. You use the flicker of your candle stub to guide your way. The mirror above the sink is cracked down the middle, like it's tired of reflecting anything. You wash your hands in water that's just a step above freezing. The soap is that brown industrial block that smells like burnt pine and regret. Here's your quirky fact. Soviet communal apartments, or communalkas, often had kitchens and bathrooms shared between several families, sometimes up to 7 or 8. Rules were unwritten but strict. No lingering, no talking politics, and absolutely no boiling fish without warning. That one should have been carved in stone. You return to your flat and collapse into your chair. The cushion is lumpy and a spring pokes you in the lower back, but it's still the most comfortable seat in your life. Your cousin is reading a book upside down, more from lack of light than confusion, and muttering about the plumbing. You nod in sympathy. Outside the snow is still falling, heavier now. It's quiet, except for a dog barking far off and the occasional groan of the building shifting. These old Khrushchyovkas are like living organisms, breathing, creaking, groaning with every gust of wind. You know exactly how many steps from your door to the stairwell creak, and you can tell who's walking by just from the rhythm of their footfalls. You take the jar of pickled mushrooms and decide tonight's the night. You boil a potato, slice it and plate it like it's dinner for royalty. Then you open the jar and fork out 3 of the least threatening pieces. You eat in silence, chewing slowly, letting the faint vinegar burn remind you that you're alive and still have taste buds. Barely. Here's your historical fact. By the 80s, communal apartments were still home to over 30% of urban Soviet citizens, particularly in cities like Leningrad and Moscow. Despite efforts to build more private housing, the demand always outstripped supply. And your scholarly debate for the night. Some researchers argue that communal living created a rare kind of intimacy among strangers, a forced community where people learned cooperation, negotiation, even empathy. Others say it bred suspicion, surveillance, and a loss of personal identity. Everyone's life was on display, and the line between neighbour and informer was often paper thin. You sit by the window after dinner, watching the snowfall gather on the ledge. The lights in the apartment across the courtyard flicker on and off. Maybe they're having better luck with the electricity tonight. Or worse, you never know. Then you hear the unmistakable sound of your cousin's breathing slowing as he drifts off in the chair. You throw a blanket over him, then crawl into bed fully dressed. It's too cold to undress, and frankly, you've already brushed your teeth with lukewarm tea water. That's close enough. As the city hunches into itself for another long, frozen night, you close your eyes and try not to think about the bucket, or the salt, or what you'd give for one fried onion. Just sleep, just silence, just this. You wake up to silence, not the gentle, serene kind, but the thick, slightly alarming kind. No pipes clanking, no neighbours' radio mumbling through the walls, not even the usual distant dog barking at the ghost of capitalism. Just stillness. You sit up slowly, blanket wrapped around your shoulders like a robe of questionable warmth, and glance at the window. The frost pattern is beautiful in that way only a Soviet winter could manage. Delicate, symmetrical, and absolutely freezing. Still no sound. You slip your feet into wool socks that could pass for medieval gauntlets and tiptoe toward the door. The hallway is unusually dim. One of the ceiling lights is out again. Of course it is. You crack open your door and peek outside just in time to see old Yuri from 2B leaning suspiciously against the stair rail, lighting a cigarette with a shaking hand. That's not odd. Yuri starts his day with 3 things: a cigarette, a grunt, and a glance around to make sure the world hasn't collapsed overnight. What's odd is the man standing halfway up the stairs, pretending not to be watching him. You step into the hallway and make like you're just going to check the mail. Yuri's eyes flick to yours, then down the hall, then back again. He jerks his chin ever so slightly toward the man, mid-30s. Clean coat, hair combed too neatly, not a neighbour, not someone who belongs here, not carrying groceries, not avoiding eye contact. That tells you plenty. Back in your apartment, you close the door softly and slide the bolt. Your cousin is still asleep, one leg flopped off the couch like a stranded fish. You make tea, slowly, quietly, and think. See, in the Soviet Union there are 2 kinds of silence. The first is the powers out again silence, familiar, boring. The second is the something's going on and we're not supposed to notice silence. This is that second one. You take your tea to the window and stare across the courtyard. There's a car you don't recognise parked near the trash bins. Black, boxy and clean. Too clean. Nobody washes their car in January unless they've got something to hide or someone to impress. Either way, the feeling in your gut starts humming like the radiator on a good day. Something's off. The day proceeds like it's pretending to be normal. You head to work, scarf wrapped high, boots crunching over ice. The usual crowd waits at the tram stop, pretending not to shiver, pretending not to make eye contact, pretending not to pretend. A man selling newspapers yells about grain quotas like it's good news. The tram arrives 5 minutes late, which for the Soviet schedule means it's early. At the factory, Valera greets you with a look that says he's seen the same man on his stairwell. Tall, sharp shoes. Quiet, he mutters as you slip into your work coats. You nod. Didn't ask for directions. Just stood there. You both say nothing for a while after that. Midway through your shift, a supervisor you barely know makes an unscheduled tour of your section. He doesn't speak, just walks up and down the aisles, clipboard under his arm, eyes scanning without focus. Everyone straightens up, overperforms, says nothing. There's nothing to see, of course. No reason for the man from the stairwell to be here. Not really. And that's what makes it worse. Here's your historical fact of the day. The KGB, the USSR's main security agency, had a presence so deep and broad that it's estimated 1 in every 18 citizens in urban areas was either a direct informant or someone who'd been pressured to report on others. Not all did, but many were on the list. And your quirky fact, it was said that if you saw the same stranger in your building twice and he wasn't carrying a hammer or toolbox, you should start memorizing your own alibi. Even if you hadn't done anything. Especially if you hadn't done anything. During lunch, you and Valera speak in code. Heard there's a new inspector, you say over your soup, which tastes like someone waved a bone over boiling water and called it broth. Valera nods. Hope he likes cold steel and long lines. Then you talk about the weather until you've convinced yourselves you're safe. By the time your shift ends, the unease has sunk into your spine like winter chill. You walk home slowly, checking corners, watching shadows. When you turn the key in your apartment door, there's a brief moment, just a half second, when you wonder if anything inside will be missing. It's not, but the doubt was there and that's enough. Your cousin is already home, flipping through a state newspaper. You tell him nothing, he tells you nothing. You both sit and read headlines neither of you believe. Record harvest in Uzbekistan. Comrades in space celebrate unity. Consumer satisfaction up 14%. You eat dinner in silence. Bread. The last of the pickled mushrooms. A smear of something yellowish that might have once been mustard. The warmth of the tea fills your chest, but the back of your neck still prickles with unease. Later there's a knock again. Same rhythm. Not Drozdiva, not Zhenya. You exchange a glance with your cousin. You both stand, you both listen. Then mercifully it's just the neighbour kid, delivering your bucket back with a crumpled thank you and what might be a drawing of a bear waving a Soviet flag. You smile, say goodnight, and shut the door, but your hand lingers on the bolt. Here's the scholarly debate. Did the KGB's quiet omnipresence create a stable society, or a terrified one? Some argue it maintained order, scared people into productivity, prevented rebellion. Others say it broke something fundamental, turned neighbours into suspects, honesty into risk, thought into something you buried under routine. You crawl into bed and try to think about anything else. About warm summers at the Dacha, about potato pancakes on holidays, about how tomorrow is bath day if the water's running. But the image that sticks in your mind is the man on the stairs, too clean, too cool, quiet, too curious. And the question that never leaves, who is watching whom? The building creaks, the radiator finally wakes with a groan. You close your eyes and remind yourself to forget. That's the safest thing of all. It's laundry day, which means your morning begins with the unmistakable sound of someone yelling about soap. Not angrily, just loudly, because that's how everyone communicates when they're standing in a concrete corridor surrounded by steam, wet socks and mild despair. You lie there in bed for a moment, blanket up to your chin, already picturing the battle ahead. The communal laundry room is free territory, no reservations, no mercy. Whoever gets there first wins. Whoever doesn't ends up boiling underwear in a soup pot. You shuffle into the kitchen in your slippers and nearly slip on a puddle left by your cousin, who's been defrosting the tiny freezer section of your refrigerator with a screwdriver and a hairdryer for the past 2 days. "You're up late," he says without looking up. "Drozdiva already stole the big tub. I heard her gloating about it." You groan. That means you're stuck with the dented metal bucket that leaks if you look at it wrong. Still, you gather your detergent ration, what's left of it anyway, a pale grey powder in a wax paper pouch with no smell and less lather, and head to the washroom with your bundle of clothes. The hallway is already muggy, doors propped open with bricks or broomsticks. Somewhere a radio crackles a patriotic song that sounds like a marching band playing in a blizzard. The washroom is a battlefield. 4 women, 3 buckets, and 1 bar of soap they're sharing like a sacred relic. You nod to everyone, say nothing, and find a space in the corner near the window where the icy wind leaks in and makes your fingers go numb. You strip off your outer layers and get to work dunking a week's worth of socks and shirts into freezing water and scrubbing like your dignity depends on it. It sort of does. There's no real privacy here. Everybody sees everybody's stains. A sock with a hole, shameful. A collar ring you didn't properly scrub. That gets noticed. It's not malicious. It's just the way things are. You work in silence next to a woman who might be a school teacher or a librarian or a quiet informant. She doesn't speak. Neither do you. It's safer that way. Halfway through, your cousin pokes his head in with a grin and a bundle of wet rags. "Forgot my work shirt," he says. "The one that smells like diesel and tears." He tosses it into your bucket and disappears. You sigh and wring out your sweater, muscles aching. Here's your quirky fact for today. In the absence of laundry machines, many Soviet citizens use bluing agents, strange little cubes of bright blue dye, dropped into the rinse water to make whites appear cleaner. The result was a kind of icy, ghostly hue that screamed freshly laundered in the most unsettling way. After 2 hours of scrubbing, wringing, and shifting your weight from one frozen foot to another, you finally carry your wet clothes back upstairs in a dripping heap. Drying them is the next adventure. Your apartment's tiny balcony, enclosed with rattling plastic panels, serves as your drying chamber. You hang socks on strings tied between rusty nails and lay heavier items over the railing, hoping they don't freeze solid before they dry. You sit near the window watching your shirt sleeves sway in the wind like surrender flags. The building across the courtyard has clotheslines too. Shirts, trousers, even a bra flapping in the wind like it's trying to escape. You catch eyes with someone across the way, a man doing the same thing you are. You both nod, solemn members of the frozen laundry fraternity. Lunch is leftover potato mashed with some cabbage. You try to liven it up with a smear of tomato paste that might be older than you, but it's still a meal. Your cousin suggests putting it on bread and calling it pizza. You tell him not to disrespect Italy like that. After lunch, you try to read a book. It's one of the few things the state encourages people to do for pleasure, as long as it's the right book. This one is Tolstoy, dusty, worn, and missing its back cover. You read 3 pages before your eyelids start to droop. Laundry day always wears you out. You drift into a nap on the couch. The kind of nap where your neck ends up at an angle that should be illegal, and your arm goes numb halfway through. You wake up groggy, with the sound of something thudding on the balcony. A shirt knocked loose by the wind lies frozen against the glass like a warning. You sigh and retrieve it, holding it stiff as a board over the stove for thawing. Here's your historical fact. The average Soviet apartment rarely had a washing machine. Even into the 80s, most people relied on hand washing and drying clothes on balconies, radiators, or improvised indoor lines, and public laundromats, scarce and notoriously unreliable. Back downstairs, the laundry room has become a sauna. Steam clings to the walls, and water runs down the cracked tile like tears. Someone's left a bucket unattended. A towel lies in the sink half-washed. It's chaos, but it's a familiar kind. These little domestic battles are the rhythm of Soviet life, small, relentless, and always slightly damp. Your scholarly debate of the day: did shared domestic tasks like laundry and communal cooking foster solidarity among neighbours, or breed resentment? Some argue it created strong interdependent communities. Others point to the pettiness, the surveillance, the constant competition over resources, as proof it was just one more layer of stress in a system already creaking under the weight of scarcity. You collect your now dryish clothes from the balcony, shake them out, and fold them roughly into a pile. Your cousin comes over, picks up one of his shirts, and sniffs it dramatically. "Smells like socialism," he says. You both laugh, a real laugh, short, tired, but real. That night you don't bother cooking. You each eat a piece of rye bread and wash it down with hot tea and a piece of candy that tastes like dust and vague orange flavour. It's enough. You sit together near the radiator, which is clanking to life again. Miraculous. Outside, the sky turns the colour of wet concrete. The snow keeps falling. The balcony creaks in the wind, and your socks, stiff and awkward, hang proudly by the window, proof that even in a place where everything is shared, borrowed or broken, some things still get done. The smell of boiled barley hits you before you're fully awake. It seeps through the walls, curls under the doorframe, and nestles in your nostrils like an overfed house cat. Your neighbour, the one with the unfortunate cough and the overwatered fern, is clearly trying a new breakfast routine. Or she's just boiling something she found in the back of her pantry and is hoping it won't turn into glue this time. Either way, it smells like the hallway outside a military cafeteria. You rub your eyes and swing your legs off the bed. The floor is cold and uninviting, but that's not new. What is new, at least for today, is the low hum of optimism in the air. Because today you're not going to the factory. No, today you're escorting your niece to school. Her mother, your cousin's sister, has a dentist appointment, which in Soviet terms means sitting in a dim hallway for 6 hours to have a tooth removed with instruments forged before the war. Your niece is already dressed when you arrive at their flat upstairs. Her coat is too big, boots slightly mismatched, and her satchel is bursting with a mix of textbooks and half-crushed bread. She grins up at you like she's off to see the wizard. You give her the standard Uncle Guardian nod and take her gloved hand in yours. The walk to school is short but eventful. You pass the usual landmarks, the suspiciously tilted lamppost, the snow-covered statue of a local war hero whose nose chipped off 3 winters ago, and the shop that never has anything in the window but posters of sausages. Real sausages? Who knows? You've never seen one in there. Your niece talks the whole time about school, about her teacher, whom she suspects is secretly married to the gym teacher, and about how she wants to be a cosmonaut or a ballerina, maybe both. You nod and offer appropriately amazed responses. She's 7, and this is the most optimism you've heard in a month. When you reach the school building, it looks like every other building. Grey, functional, and slightly damp. Inside, the hallway smells like chalk, wet wool, and cabbage. You help her hang up her coat in the crowded cloakroom and watch as she disappears into a wave of other children, each dragging their little bags, trailing scarves, or clinging to hand-knitted mittens. You linger a bit, leaning against the wall under a poster of Lenin that declares, "Learn, learn, and learn again." His eyes seem to follow you, possibly judging your homework record. A bell rings, loud and shrill. Children vanish into classrooms like been sucked into a vacuum of structured mediocrity. You think about your own time in school, the recitations of patriotic poems, the mandatory hand-raising before speaking, the monthly self-criticism sessions where you had to admit that you didn't fold your uniform correctly, or that you sometimes daydreamed about Finland. Education was free, yes, but so was the indoctrination. Every subject came with a political footnote. 2 + 2 = 4, and also capitalism is a failure. Here's your historical fact. Soviet education was highly centralized and emphasized not just academics, but ideological loyalty. Students were trained to memorize facts, respect authority, and internalize party values, whether they understood them or not. You stop by the school library on your way out. It's small but warm and smells pleasantly of paper and old wood. You chat briefly with the librarian, who wears the same sweater every day and has a voice like sandpaper. She lets you check out a book of Russian folktales, one of the few safe genres left untouched by censors. Walking home, the streets are slowly filling with life. People queue at a kiosk, hoping for apples or maybe fish. A tram screeches by, trailing sparks. You pass an old man playing chess alone on a bench with a thermos of cold tea beside him. He nods once, moves a pawn, then goes back to pretending he doesn't want company. Back at your building, you find the entryway posted with a new notice. It's handwritten in red marker on official paper and has the vague smell of bureaucracy. All residents must attend Saturday's Pioneer Youth Celebration in the square. Children are expected to be in uniform. Families may bring banners. You read it twice. Your cousin groans from the stairwell. "I already burned my banner," he mutters. You spend your afternoon doing something dangerous, cleaning out your drawer. Not the one with socks, the other drawer. The one with your old Pioneer scarf, a stack of postcards and a couple of banned pamphlets you definitely never read. You pause over a small badge with a red star and the face of Lenin on it. Every Soviet child wore one, pinned above their heart, swearing loyalty to a system they didn't understand. Your niece has one too, pinned crookedly to her coat. You helped her put it on this morning. Here's your quirky fact. Pioneer uniforms, scarves, pins, white shirts, were so standardised that children would get marked down in school for wrinkled sleeves or a loosely tied knot. Some parents ironed them the night before like they were preparing for military inspection. And here's the scholarly debate. Did these youth organisations truly foster community and patriotic pride? Or did they simply mould the next generation into obedient citizens too busy singing songs and attending parades to ask the wrong questions? Some say it was all harmless ritual. Others believe it laid the foundation for a lifelong fear of standing out. You make a quick dinner, fried cabbage and barley mush, and settle by the window with your folktales book. You read aloud to your cousin, both of you half listening as a prince defeats a dragon using cleverness and a magic comb. You both know the comb wouldn't be available in stores. Outside, the kids from the building play in the snow under the yellow light of a flickering street lamp. One has a red scarf tied around her head like a superhero cape. You smile, close the book and stretch. Tomorrow you go back to work, to steel and machines and queues and silence. But today you walked a child to school. You remembered what hope sounded like, even if only in the voice of a 7-year-old dreaming of the moon. Saturday arrives with all the charm of a wet blanket left out in the snow. You're not even fully awake before you hear the rhythmic knocking of boots on concrete. Parents dragging their half-asleep children out the front door. Collars turned up, scarves trailing behind like little red flags of reluctant patriotism. Today is the Pioneer Youth Celebration, which means banners, chants, too much standing in the cold, and clapping until your gloves go damp. You sit on the edge of your bed, holding your forehead in one hand and trying to remember if the banner you were supposed to bring was lost in the Great Closet Purge of last year. Your cousin shuffles in, eyes puffy, hair stuck up like he's been electrocuted. He mutters something unprintable about frostbite and ideology, and then goes off to boil water. At least tea still makes sense. You dress in layers, long johns, thermal shirt, thick sweater, the coat that smells like last winter's soup, and your hat that's now more patched than original fabric. Then, in what has become a kind of ritual humiliation, you find the red armband issued to all adult volunteers and strap it on. It's scratchy and slightly crooked, like the very concept of this morning. You meet your niece and her classmates outside. They're all bundled, squinting in the pale morning light, and holding thin wooden sticks with slogans on cardboard. "Forward with Lenin's spirit," one says, slightly bent in the middle. Another reads, "Our future is glorious labour," which feels more like a threat than encouragement. A woman with a clipboard is shouting names like she's assembling troops for the battle. The square is already crowded when you arrive. Children in crisp white shirts, most layered under thick sweaters, stand in semi-orderly rows. There's a giant portrait of Lenin propped up near the stage, one eye glaring at the horizon, the other clearly judging your posture. A brass band plays something vaguely triumphant, muffled by their scarves and the freezing air. You take your place at the edge of the square with the other volunteer chaperones, which is just a nicer way of saying warm bodies for visual unity. You stamp your feet to stay warm and watch as the children begin their chants. They raise their tiny fists, shout slogans in unison, and wave little flags. Some are smiling, some are shivering, one is definitely asleep standing up. A man in a long coat takes the stage and begins his speech. It's the kind of speech you've heard 100 times, about the youth being the builders of tomorrow, about hard work and loyalty, about the eternal greatness of Soviet unity. His voice echoes through the loudspeakers like it's trying to reach Mars. You zone out halfway through, watching a pigeon struggle to fly against the wind. Here's your historical fact. The Young Pioneers was the official youth organisation for children aged 9 to 15 in the USSR. Nearly every child joined, it was essentially mandatory, and the group emphasised discipline, community service, and unwavering loyalty to communist ideals. Scarves were red for a reason, symbolising the blood of past revolutionaries. The kids start singing now, those cheerful, slightly eerie tunes that somehow always involve tractors, sunshine, and slogans. You remember the lyrics from your own pioneer days, even though you haven't sung them in years. The words come back like old scars. You don't sing out loud, but you hum the tune quietly, so quietly even you barely notice. Your niece waves at you from the front row. Her scarf is crooked, her cheeks red, but her smile is real. For a second, you forget how ridiculous all this is. Then someone hands you a stack of pamphlets to distribute. Educational material, they say. You take one look and recognise the usual fare: how to be a model pioneer, how to report unsafe behaviour, which is not so secret code for ideological non-compliance, and a heroic story about a 13-year-old boy who once alerted authorities about his own father's anti-party behaviour. That one always chills you. Here's your quirky fact. The Soviet government often published heroic tales about children who turned in their parents or teachers for disloyalty to the state. These stories were included in school textbooks and read aloud during assemblies. The moral was always clear: loyalty to the state over loyalty to family. You hand out the pamphlets with a straight face. The children take them dutifully, slipping them into coat pockets or using them as makeshift windbreaks. One boy drops his in a puddle. You pretend not to see. As the event nears its third hour, your knees start to lock up. The cold has crept into your bones, and even your thermals feel like they're made of wet cardboard. A second speaker takes the stage, this one more animated, practically shouting about industrial growth and the heroic miners of Donetsk. No one's listening. The children have started fidgeting, pulling off gloves to fidget with scarves, whispering to each other behind their hands. Your niece tugs your sleeve. "When can we go home?" she whispers. You check your watch and give her the most optimistic lie you can manage. Soon. Finally, mercifully, the band starts up again. That means the parade is about to begin. You walk alongside the children as they march through the square, up the main avenue, past the statue of a Soviet poet no one reads anymore, and then loop back around to the schoolyard. Onlookers clap, a few take photos, and someone throws candy that disappears faster than state funding for plumbing. Back at the school, the children are dismissed. You watch them scatter like dandelion seeds, scarves trailing behind them, boots squeaking, voices laughing again now that the performance is over. Your niece hugs you before running off with her friends. "That was boring," she says with a grin, "but the candy was good." You walk home slowly, hands shoved deep in your coat pockets. Your armband itches. Your toes are numb. But there's a strange feeling in your chest. Not pride exactly, but something like endurance. You've done this before. You'll do it again, not for the speeches, not for the slogans, but for the ones who still wave from the front row. Your cousin's already home when you arrive, boiling more barley, of course. He takes one look at you, red-cheeked and wind-burned, and asks, "How many slogans this time?" 17, you reply. And 3 references to Lenin. He whistles. A new record. Here's the scholarly debate. Were events like these just harmless rituals to keep children busy, or were they calculated tools of ideological conditioning? Some historians argue these gatherings offered genuine community and structure. Others see them as early rehearsals for a life of compliance, performance, and quiet self-censorship. You take off your coat, drop onto the couch, and sip tea so hot it burns your tongue. It doesn't matter. Your feet are still thawing. Outside, the wind has finally died down. You close your eyes and hum the Pioneer song under your breath, just loud enough for no one to hear. It starts with a whisper in the stairwell. Not a loud, urgent whisper, the kind you lean in to catch, pretend not to hear, then absolutely repeat to someone else later. This one rides the air between floors, carried by boots creaking up the steps and the soft hush of a grocery bag swinging. "He's got jeans," someone mutters. "Real ones, Levi's." You pause halfway through peeling a sad potato, your paring knife suddenly very still. Levi's. That word doesn't mean much in most of the world. Just a brand, just denim. But here it's more like a spell. Western jeans are rare, expensive, forbidden in some cases. The stuff of black market legends. You glance out your peephole, heart doing a little stutter, and catch the back of a young man disappearing into 4C, with what looks like an unusually stiff plastic bag tucked under his coat. You go back to your potato, but it's ruined now. You're not even sure what you're peeling anymore. Your cousin walks in, sniffs the air and asks, "Burnt again?" You don't answer. You just hand him the peeler and say, "Someone in the building got Levi's?" That stops him in his tracks. The black market, or as people like to call it when pretending to be innocent, the informal economy, is the shadow under the surface of daily life. Official stores are where you go to be disappointed. But if you want things that work, that last, or that bring even a flicker of joy, you go to someone who knows someone, the cousin of a guy who works at the train depot, the woman with a brother in Hungary, that teenager who somehow got his hands on an Adidas windbreaker and now walks like a prince through snow. Later that day you take the trash out, slowly, with purpose. It's an excuse to linger in the hallway without looking like you're lingering. And sure enough, you catch sight of the jeans again. The kid from 4C, Misha, you think his name is standing at the stairwell talking to two other boys. He's wearing them. Faded indigo, high-waisted, tight in the way Soviet jeans never were. You can almost hear the American guitar riffs echoing off the brick. One of the other boys holds out a ration coupon like he thinks it's worth something. Misha laughs, waves it off. "Chickens," he says. "Frozen ones, 2 of them, plus cigarettes." He points to his hip. "This stitching? You think that comes cheap?" You watch, silent. Not envious exactly, just awake. It's not the jeans, not really. It's what they mean. They mean options. They mean someone's been outside the lines and come back with a souvenir. They mean choice. Here's your historical fact for today. Despite being officially banned or restricted, Western consumer goods, especially clothing, were highly sought after in the USSR. Jeans in particular became a symbol of rebellion and status. A single pair of Levi's could be traded on the black market for the equivalent of a month's wages or more. And here's your quirky fact. There was even a name for Soviet-made knockoffs, faux jeans or samopal, stitched to look Western, but made of scratchy, stiff fabric that could probably deflect bullets. Some citizens would embroider fake Levi's patches onto them, hoping to pass. Back in your apartment, your cousin starts telling stories. About that time in university when he knew a guy who smuggled in Western records, copied them onto X-rays, and sold them as bone music. You laugh. Everyone knows that one. A crackly Beatles track printed on someone's chest cavity. You heard it once at a party. It sounded like rebellion. Then the conversation shifts. Misha's jeans led to someone's Polish cassette deck, which leads to someone else's Bulgarian boots. Before long, it's a full-blown underground catalogue. Cigarettes for batteries, imported perfume for a car part, 2 cans of coffee for a working VCR. Your cousin mentions a friend who once traded a live rabbit for a bottle of Pepsi. "We didn't drink it," he says. "We just looked at it." You don't even realise you're making a list in your head until you stop and think, what would I trade? What do I have that's worth anything? That night you go down to the basement, officially to help clear ice from the pipes, unofficially to see if anyone's talking. And sure enough, there's Yuri, the old guy from 2B, sipping from a flask and leaning against the boiler like he's guarding state secrets. You nod, light a cigarette, and wait. After a few minutes, he starts talking. "Used to be a man in Minsk," he says. "Smuggled jeans through the Baltic ports, used hollowed-out car doors." He takes another swig. "One time, a customs officer found a whole box of chewing gum hidden in a spare tyre. Western stuff, juicy fruit." He laughs. "Imagine chewing something that tasted like anything." It's absurd, but you feel it, the spark of possibility. Not just for the gum or the jeans, but for the idea that there are cracks in the system, small ones, but real. Here's the scholarly debate. Did the black market undercut the ideals of the Soviet system by importing Western influence? Or did it prop the system up, allowing citizens to cope by quietly bypassing its failures? Some scholars argue that without it, people would have rebelled. Others believe it taught them to accept corruption as normal, as just another flavour of survival. Back upstairs, you and your cousin sit by the window watching Misha parade by one more time in his jeans. He walks like someone who knows the rules and chooses to ignore them. He'll probably get in trouble eventually. Maybe someone will report him. Maybe not. You lean back, arms folded, and sigh. "You ever own anything Western?" you ask, your cousin thinks. "Had a Zippo once, silver, didn't even smoke back then, just like the click," he grins. "Traded it for a German umbrella, lost that in a storm." You both fall into a thoughtful balance. You don't need jeans, not really. You're not even sure what you'd do with them, but still, as you stretch your legs and glance down at your own rough, state-issued trousers, grey, stiff, unsympathetic, you start to imagine, just a little, and you can't help it. You wonder what it feels like to walk through your life in a pair of Levi's, with a lighter in your pocket and a song in your ear that has never been approved by anyone. You wake up to birdsong, actual birdsong, not someone whistling or the crackle of a radio, but real, living birds. It's jarring. You blink in the early light and sit up slowly, trying to figure out what season it is without looking at the calendar. Spring? No, not yet. It's just warm enough to trick the birds, warm enough for the ice on the windows to stop forming little mountain ranges overnight. Your cousin walks into the room barefoot, squinting at the window. "You hear that?" he asks, as if you're both witnessing a miracle. You nod. Neither of you mention that one of those birds is probably already being targeted by the old man from 3C, who once tried to catch a pigeon with a tennis racket and a net made from curtain lace. You don't have to go to the factory today, it's the weekend, and by some unspoken miracle, no community cleaning duty has been assigned. No patriotic assembly, no plumbing emergency, no mandatory group discussion about the glory of iron production in Novosibirsk. Which means only one thing, Dacha time. You pack like you're going to war. Bread, butter, 1 cucumber, a tin of sprats, jar of jam that's more crystallized sugar than fruit, 2 mugs and 3 mismatched spoons. You wrap everything in towels and tuck it into a canvas bag that smells like generations of mildew and optimism. Your cousin brings matches, a kettle, and a deck of cards so warped it's practically folklore. The journey begins at the tram station, where a crowd has already gathered, all with the same dream: escape the city, even just for a day. The tram itself is a metal beast from another century, painted green and shrieking with every turn. Inside, people are squashed together, balancing jars of pickles and bags of fertilizer between their knees. There's a distinct smell, part wet wool, part soil, and part hope. The Dacha plots lie on the city's ragged edge, nestled in forests that still remember being wild. Each one is a patch of land no bigger than a generous backyard with a crooked wooden shack perched somewhere in the middle. Yours is painted an indecisive blue-green and leans slightly to the left, like it's considering retirement. You unlock the door with a rusty key that's more rust than key and step inside. The air is musty with the faint scent of kerosene and damp wood. Everything's exactly where you left it. A stove that wheezes, a tiny table with a drawer that sticks, and a bed covered in an army blanket that doubles as both insulation and a makeshift curtain. The first order of business is tea. You boil water on the tiny stove, watching the flame flicker as you hold the kettle just right, willing it to stay lit. Once the tea is steeped, weak but comforting, you sit outside on a creaky wooden bench and sip in silence, letting the sun brush your sang-mar. There are no machines here, no grey buildings, no lines, no announcements over the loudspeaker about potato yields. Just the occasional sound of someone hammering something, birds flitting through the bare trees, and your cousin muttering about the roof leak. Again. Here's your historical fact. In the Soviet Union, dachas, small seasonal country houses, were granted to workers, professionals and retirees. Though officially modest, they became havens for privacy and quiet rebellion. Gardening, reading contraband books, even playing banned Western music was safer behind a garden fence than in an apartment hallway. Your cousin goes off to chop some wood while you inspect the garden. Nothing's growing yet, of course, but there's something sacred in the empty beds. You run your fingers through the soil, dark and still cold. Soon there will be potatoes, then cucumbers, then maybe, if you're lucky and the worms are generous, strawberries. Not much, but enough to matter. Back at the shack, your cousin returns with a bundle of twigs and a smug expression. Found an old wasp's nest under the shed, he says. Empty, but still terrifying. You nod in approval. Country life has its own dangers. You make lunch, slices of bread with sprats and butter, cucumber cut with a penknife and weak tea sweetened with sugar cubes you've been hoarding since New Year's. It tastes better out here. Everything does. Even the tea somehow has more flavour when it's sipped in a creaking chair under a sun that finally remembers how to shine. Here's your quirky fact. Many Soviet citizens built their dachas almost entirely out of scavenged or borrowed materials. Windows from old factories, doors from demolished schools, nails traded for vodka. Some even built entire structures by smuggling lumber one board at a time on the tram. After lunch, you lie in the sun, arms folded under your head, and stare at the sky. It's not blue exactly, more like faded denim. But there's no smoke in it. No wires crisscrossing the view. Just clouds, slow and soft, drifting nowhere in particular. You almost fall asleep. You kind of want to. But your cousin insists on playing cards, and so you oblige, sitting at the tiny table while the wind rattles the window panes. You play Durac, of course, because there is no Soviet citizen who doesn't know Durac. And he wins, as always. He grins like he's just bested a master. Luck, you mutter, but he knows better. As the sun begins to dip behind the trees, you gather your things. There's no electricity here, no lamps that work properly, and once it's dark, it gets dark. You lock the door, check the fence, and head back toward the tram station, your bag lighter. Your heart's somehow steadier. The ride home is quieter. People slump in their seats, sun-touched and soothed. A woman hums a folk tune under her breath. A little boy clutches a bunch of wildflowers like he just won the lottery. Here's your scholarly debate. Were Dacha's a state-approved reward to pacify the masses, a way to let off steam so no one rebelled? Or were they quiet acts of independence, private oases in a system designed for collective conformity? Some say both. Escape, even sanctioned escape, is still escape. You arrive home just as the streetlights flicker on. Your cousin carries the kettle like a trophy. You carry the silence inside you stretched out like a blanket. The city hasn't changed in your absence, but you have, just a little. That's enough for now. You hang up your coat, wash the mug, and sink into your bed with muscles sore from sunlight and fresh air. For the first time in weeks, you fall asleep with dirt under your nails and no thoughts in your head. The letter arrives unexpectedly. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper slipped under your door sometime between the crack of dawn and the first clatter of boots on the stairwell. It smells faintly of laundry soap and pencil shavings, and the handwriting is small, careful, and unmistakably hers. You recognise it immediately, those loopy E's and tight G's that always looked like they were marching in formation. You unfold it and begin to read, half dreading what it might say, half already smiling. It's from her, the girl you met years ago at a pioneer gathering, back when the most rebellious thing you could imagine was sneaking an extra sugar cube into your tea. You haven't seen her in almost a year, not since she transferred to another oblast to take care of her sick aunt. You've thought about her plenty since then, thought about the way she used to hand you notes during meetings, about how she always seemed to say what you were thinking, but better. In the letter, she tells you she's coming back for a short visit, just a few days. Her uncle found her a temporary post at the local library, covering for someone on maternity leave. She'll be working, but not enough to keep me from a long walk in the park if someone happens to show up at the same time. You read that sentence 3 times, trying to decide if it means what you think it means. You decide it does. Your cousin finds you sitting at the kitchen table, the letter folded in front of you like a sacred document. He raises an eyebrow. That from the tax office or a secret admirer? You shake your head, smile, and tuck the letter into your coat pocket like it might vanish if left alone too long. Later that afternoon, you head to the park. It's not quite spring yet, just the early thaw, where the snow is melting into puddles that reflect the grey sky, and everyone pretends not to slip on the ice hiding underneath. The park is still mostly brown, the trees bare, benches wet, but it's open. An open space in this city feels like a gift. You find her waiting near the statue of the poet with the missing hand. She's wearing the same long coat you remember, though it looks a little more threadbare than before. Her hair's shorter now, tucked into a wool cap, and she's holding a book in one hand, fingers tucked carefully between the pages. "Hello, stranger," she says, smiling like she just saw you yesterday. You smile back, awkwardly. "I almost didn't recognise you without a red scarf and a loudspeaker." She laughs. It's the same laugh. You both fall into step along the cracked path, walking side by side through melting snow and the faint smell of wet bark. You talk about safe things first. Work, food lines, whether the bakery on the corner still sells that weirdly sweet black bread. Then she tells you about life out in the other oblast. How quiet it was, how boring. How the only excitement was when the town got a shipment of Georgian citrus and the whole square smelled like oranges for 2 days. You ask if she missed the city. She says, "I missed someone in it." You look over at her, but she's watching the geese gather in the half-thawed pond like she didn't just drop a small heart-shaped bomb into the conversation. Here's your historical fact. Though arranged marriages were encouraged in earlier decades of the USSR by the 1970s and 80s, Romantic relationships and courtship had become more common, even if shaped by the limits of public space, censorship, and parental oversight. Young couples often found privacy in parks, forests, or even on the roofs of apartment buildings. You sit on a bench that's mostly dry. The wind is sharp, but you don't care. You ask about her work at the library and she lights up, talks about sorting the old card catalogues, finding a stash of banned poetry tucked between gardening manuals, and how she secretly read half a copy of Dr. Zhivago before hiding it again. "It's so strange," she says, "reading a book you're not supposed to read. It makes every word feel like it's aimed right at you." You nod. You felt that too, even if you won't say what you've read and where you read it. It's safer that way. Here's your quirky fact. Many banned Western, or censored Soviet books were circulated as handwritten copies, known as samizdat. People would copy entire novels by hand or type them out using carbon paper, sharing them secretly among trusted friends. Owning one was illegal. Reading one was revolutionary. You talk for hours, about nothing, about everything, about how the hot water in your building works only when you least expect it, about how her aunt still believes America is run by cowboys, about how some days it's hard to tell if you're really living or just waiting for something else to start. When the sun begins to dip behind the clouds, you walk her to the tram stop. She pulls her coat tighter and leans a little closer, not quite touching you, but close enough to make your heart beat faster than it has in weeks. You reach into your pocket and pull out the last wrapped candy you've been saving since New Year's. You hand it to her without a word. She takes it, eyes bright. The tram pulls up, sighing like an old man with tired knees. She steps on, turns around and says, "Same time tomorrow?" You nod, and the door hisses shut between you. Here's your scholarly debate. In a society built on collectivism and ideological conformity, where even private thoughts could be dangerous, how did people carve out space for love? Was it an act of rebellion, a necessity for survival, or just another part of life that found a way, stubbornly, through the cracks? You walk home under a sky that's trying very hard to remember how to be blue. Your boots splash through slush, and your breath fogs the air in front of you, but you barely notice. Your cousin asks where you've been, and you shrug, trying not to smile too wide. He eyes you suspiciously. Chore. You don't tell him anything. But later, you unfold her letter again and read it one more time. Then you fold it back, place it under your pillow, and lie down smiling. In a place where hope is rare and risk is constant, today felt different. You fall asleep thinking not of the next ration queue or inspection, but of her laugh, her words, her fingers tucked between pages. And maybe, if no one's listening, that's enough for now. The morning begins with drums. Not actual drums, but the rhythmic thudding of feet in the hallway. Children practicing their parade steps, supervised by the elderly woman from 3A who's somehow made it her mission to train the next generation of marchers like they're heading off to the front lines. You hear her barking corrections through the thin walls. Left foot, no, your left, and smile like you're proud to be cold. You pull the blanket tighter over your head and groan. It's Mayday, International Workers' Day, a holiday that sounds exciting on the calendar, but in practice involves standing for hours in the cold while pretending to enjoy watching other people wave flags at other people waving bigger flags. You've attended every year since you were old enough to hold a sign, and you've clapped so often and so forcefully that your palms now sting at the mere sound of a marching band. But attendance is non-negotiable. Mayday isn't just a holiday, it's a test of loyalty, of visibility, of posture. The party watches closely. Too much enthusiasm and you're trying too hard, not enough and you're disloyal. It's a dance you've learned well, just enough clapping, just enough smiling, and never ever the first to leave. You dress in your cleanest clothes, which means the same trousers as yesterday, but with a different shirt that smells faintly of soap. Your cousin emerges from the bedroom rubbing his eyes and muttering about patriotism being incompatible with frostbite. He pins a small red badge to his lapel anyway, because some habits aren't optional. Outside, the whole neighbourhood is transforming. Flags are being hung from windows, some new, most faded. Loudspeakers on the lampposts blare triumphant songs about tractors and sunshine. Children in pioneer scarves bounce with excitement, not because they love Mayday, but because they've been promised candy if they behave. You and your cousin fall into step with the crowd moving toward the central square. It's a slow, awkward procession. People carrying posters of smiling workers, flowers that look suspiciously plastic, and portraits of Lenin that have clearly been recycled from last year. A man in a wrinkled suit leads a group of schoolchildren chanting "Peace, Labour, May" with all the enthusiasm of a dentist's waiting room. When you reach the square, it's already packed. Red banners stretch from lamppost to lamppost, fluttering in the breeze like celebratory warnings. A stage has been erected near the statue of the city's hero of industry, whose concrete face peers out over the crowd with the expression of someone who's just been told his lunch break is cancelled. The speeches begin. First the mayor, then someone from the local tractor plant, then a man introduced as senior engineer of collective Mafia. Each speech is longer than the last and delivered in the same droning cadence, full of words like glory bars, eternal and unshakable. You zone out during the third speaker and start watching a pigeon strut near the foot of the statue, pecking at something that might be gum, or possibly a discarded slogan. Here's your historical fact. Mayday was one of the most important public holidays in the Soviet Union. It combined displays of military strength, labour unity, and ideological conformity. Participation wasn't officially mandatory, but absence was definitely noted and often recorded. You clap at the appropriate moments, cheer when the crowd does, and wave a small flag handed to you by a teenage volunteer who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Your cousin whispers, "If we chant loud enough, maybe they'll skip the fifth speaker." You both know that won't happen. The quirky fact of the day? Some Soviet factories would produce special batches of extra bright, extra red fabric just for Mayday banners, textiles so garish they were dubbed parade-only reds. You once saw one burst into flame under stage lights during a rally. It was extinguished with patriotic haste. After the speeches, the parade begins. Military cadets, factory workers, students, and even a surprisingly chipper group of librarians all march past the reviewing stand with raised fists and fixed grins. You spot Misha, the kid with the jeans from last week, now in a pressed uniform, looking like he's been scrubbed by a committee. You give him a thumbs up. He smirks. And then, just as the seventh float begins to roll by, this one celebrating regional potato yield increases, you see her, the girl from the park. She's marching with a group from the library holding a sign that reads "Bo." Knowledge is the light of progress. She catches your eye, flashes a smile, and lifts the sign a little higher. Your heart does something undignified. You make your way around the square as the parade continues, careful not to look like you're trying to find someone. Eventually, you spot her group peeling off behind the stage. You wave, she waves back, and you both meet behind a stack of unused slogans. She's flushed from the march, her hair slightly windblown, her cheeks bright. "You made it," she says. "Wasn't going to miss the light of progress," you reply. You walk together, drifting toward the edge of the square where the crowd begins to thin. She pulls a small paper cone from her coat pocket, roasted sunflower seeds still warm. She offers it to you without a word. You take a handful and crack the shells with your teeth, spitting them into the snow like punctuation marks. "Remember when we thought Mayday was exciting?" she asks. You nod. When the candy was new and the speeches were short, and the flags weren't falling apart. You walk in silence for a while, the sound of distant music fading behind you. Somewhere someone is setting off firecrackers, or maybe it's just another car backfiring, hard to tell. Here's the scholarly debate. Were holidays like Mayday tools of control meant to simulate national unity and drown dissent in choreography and speeches? Or were they genuine expressions of communal identity, something people reshaped into their own kind of celebration despite the official purpose? Back home, your cousin has beaten you there. He's already got a kettle on and is nursing a piece of parade candy like it's the reward for surviving battle. You tell him about the seeds, the smile, the walk he doesn't tease and just grins and says, "Mayday miracle." Later that night, as the last of the banners flutter in the wind and the square empties into silence, you lie in bed thinking about the way she looked, with the sign in her hands and her boots almost slipping just slightly on the ice. You remember her laugh, the warmth of the seeds, and the way the crowd felt smaller with her in it. For a holiday about work, today didn't feel like labour. It felt like something else, something lighter, almost real. It's Sunday morning and the city has settled into the kind of stillness that only happens once a week. No trams yet, no shouted orders from factory courtyards, no announcements from loudspeakers mounted on street corners. It's not exactly quiet. There's always some neighbour moving furniture or arguing about potatoes, but it's quieter. You sit at the table with a mug of tea and your feet tucked up underneath you, watching the steam curl toward the window. Your cousin is still asleep, snoring lightly under a stack of blankets like a retired bear. You'd call it peaceful, except for the tension under your skin. Not the usual anxiety about ration lines or missed meetings. No, this is older, deeper. Today is Sunday, yes, but it's also Easter. And you know it's not supposed to be, at least not officially. In the USSR, religion isn't just frowned upon, it's pushed underground like a weed in a manicured lawn. The churches are mostly museums now. A few still function, out in the countryside, tucked behind forests and red tape. But even those are watched closely. Faith, they say, belongs to the past. The new world doesn't need angels when it has 5-year plans and cosmic communism. But your grandmother didn't believe that, and her faith lives somewhere inside you still, quiet, private, tucked between dusty memories and habits you don't question. So you get dressed slowly, pull on your coat, and take a small paper-wrapped bundle from the cupboard. Inside, a single hard-boiled egg, dyed the pale pink of beet water, and a slice of sweet bread folded in wax paper. You wrap the bundle in an old scarf and slip it into your coat pocket, like contraband. You're not going to church. Not really. You're going to a house on the far side of town, one your grandmother used to call the safe place. You haven't been in years, but today something pulls you there. Nostalgia, maybe, or guilt, or just the need to feel something sacred. You walk through back streets and side paths, avoiding the main road. It's colder than yesterday, and your breath clouds in front of you like a secret escaping your lips. The streets are mostly empty except for a few old women hauling bags, scarves tied tight under their chins. You know without asking that they're walking the same direction. The building is plain, 4 stories of dull plaster and peeling paint. Nothing marks it as different, but you remember the back staircase. You slip inside, heart thudding, and climb to the second floor. A door is already cracked open. A soft voice greets you, not by name but with a nod. You step in. The room is dim, the windows curtained, the air thick with the smell of beeswax candles and something faintly floral. About 20 people are gathered, most of them old, some younger, a few children sitting silently with wide eyes. A man stands in the corner, not in robes, just a plain dark suit. He begins to speak, not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. A prayer, familiar. You haven't heard it aloud in years, but the words still ring somewhere in the bones of your memory. Here's your historical fact. Despite the Soviet Union's official stance on atheism, religious belief persisted across generations. While churches were closed or repurposed, many believers continued practicing in secret. Baptisms, weddings, and holiday rituals took place quietly in homes, often at great personal risk. You don't close your eyes during the prayer. You watch the faces around you, the lined cheeks, the bent backs, the trembling hands clutched in silence. There's no grandeur here, no stained glass or gilded icons. Just people holding on to something the state has tried, again and again, to erase. When the prayer ends, there's no applause, no grand exit, just shared glances and the passing of small cloth-wrapped bundles. You offer yours, sliding it across the table. Someone hands you a slice of kulik, rich and sweet, baked in a repurposed coffee can, with sugar hardened on top like tiny bits of glass. You eat slowly. No one speaks, but there's a calmness here, a kind of dignity, as if this, more than any parade or proclamation, is what makes you real. Here's your quirky fact. During the Soviet years, families would sometimes hide Easter eggs inside loaves of bread or under floorboards during inspections, especially if they lived in shared apartments. Children were often told never to speak of holidays outside the home, and even small signs, like flowers on a windowsill, could be seen as suspicious. On your walk home, the streets are busier. Trams rattle past, shops open, the illusion of normalcy returns. You pass a man sweeping the sidewalk in front of a factory, whistling at a military tune. Everything looks exactly as it should. Back in your flat, your cousin is awake, stirring a pot of kasha on the stove. He doesn't ask where you've been, but he notices something in your hands, the small napkin folded with care, the way your jacket smells faintly of candle smoke. He says nothing, just slides a chipped bowl across the table and says, "Eat before it gets gluey." You sit and eat in silence, the kasha bland but warm. You think about the people in that arupamo, their voices rising gently in defiance of silence. You think about your grandmother and how she used to bless her tea with a small cross drawn over the cup, even when she thought no one was looking. You remember being a child and thinking it was magic. Here's your scholarly debate. Was the suppression of religion in the USSR a success or a failure? The official statistics boasted declining belief, but oral histories and underground gatherings suggest faith endured, reshaped, hidden, but alive. Some argue that the very act of suppressing belief only strengthened it, making it more personal, more private, more unbreakable. That night you light a candle, just one. No ceremony, no words. You don't even tell your cousin what it's for. You set it on the windowsill and watch the flame flicker against the darkness outside. It's not protest. It's not pride. It's not even faith, maybe. It's memory. And in a world where so much is denied, memory is the one thing that can't be confiscated. You blow out the candle and go to bed. The wax still smells faintly of bees and old prayers. You sit in the dark, fiddling with the dial on your radio. It's almost midnight. Your cousin's snoring softly behind the curtain that separates your sleeping spaces, and the radiator has gone quiet again, either from exhaustion or just indifference. The apartment is dim, lit only by the soft green glow of the radio dial and the blinking of the street lamp outside. You twist the knob slowly, inch by inch, searching for that thin sliver of sound that doesn't belong. Most of it is the usual fare, local frequencies blaring out military marches, agricultural forecasts and monotone announcers reading from party bulletins. But somewhere in between all that, buried like a message in a bottle, you find it. A voice, crisp, too crisp, American probably, British maybe, speaking Russian but with that strange clarity, that refusal to sound bored. The station comes and goes like a ghost. And now, music from the other side of the world, the announcer says. And suddenly there it is, a saxophone, lazy and smooth, gliding across the static like it has no idea how illegal it is. You turn the volume down to a whisper and lean in, heart racing. It feels like a crime, because technically it is. Listening to foreign broadcasts is illegal. Everyone knows it, but everyone does it, in secret, late at night, quiet as a confession. The music plays on, a soft drum beat. A woman's voice, smoky and low, singing in English. You don't understand every word, but the feeling comes through clearly enough. It's not about tractors. It's not about the revolution. It's about longing, want, something human. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. Here's your historical fact. During the Cold War, millions of Soviet citizens tuned into Western radio broadcasts like Voice of America, BBC World Service, and Radio Free Europe. Despite heavy jamming by Soviet authorities, many still found ways to listen, often in the middle of the night when the jamming was weaker. Your cousin stirs on the other side of the curtain. You freeze, hand hovering over the dial, but he just grunts and rolls over. You exhale slowly and turn the dial again. The music fades, replaced by static. You twist a bit more. And there it is. Another voice. This one reading the news. Real news. Not the polished fiction printed in Pravda, but grim, unfiltered headlines from places you're not supposed to think about. Unrest in Poland. Protests in the West. Something about a speech by Reagan that probably involved the word freedom used like punctuation. You listen, not because you're a dissident, not because you're trying to join anything or start anything. You just want to know what the world sounds like beyond the borders you were born inside. Here's your quirky fact. Some people built elaborate contraptions to improve reception. Wires stretched across balconies, foil-wrapped antennas, even tuning radios inside bathtubs to block jamming signals. There were rumours that hiding under a metal bed frame helped. No one knew if it worked, but it felt like trying mattered. Eventually the news fades too, and you catch a weather report for Berlin. Rain and wind. Somehow that seems comforting. You picture people in coats and scarves, walking briskly with umbrellas, stepping into warm cafes. You wonder what it feels like to walk down a street lined with neon signs instead of propaganda posters, where the shop windows actually have what they advertise. Then comes a song with a guitar so rich it makes your chest ache. It's not even a complicated tune, just a gentle rhythm and a voice full of gravel and hope. You can't understand the lyrics, but you don't need to. The song isn't for understanding, it's for feeling. And for the first time in a while, you feel like you've touched something that wasn't wrapped in 5 layers of red tape. Here's your scholarly debate. Was the Soviet state's information control effective in keeping the population ideologically loyal? Or did the persistent flow of illegal foreign media simply create a culture of quiet defiance, one that made official narratives feel more absurd with every new broadcast? Some argue that listening to foreign radio helped build awareness and resistance. Others suggest it merely allowed people to dream, not act. You keep the radio on for as long as you dare. The voices eventually blend back into static, and the static into silence. You switch it off and sit in the darkness for a while, staring at the wall. It's cracked in the corner the same way it's always been. Nothing in this room has changed, but something in you has, just a little. You crawl into bed and pull the blanket over your head. The room is quiet now, except for the faint hum of the pipes and your cousin's rhythmic breathing. You close your eyes and picture the woman singing, her voice rising through the fog of jamming signals, drifting across borders, across oceans, across the grey rooftops of this city to find you. Just you. Tomorrow you'll wake up and go to work. You'll eat kasha and wait in line for toilet paper and pretend to care about the latest slogan tacked to the factory wall. But tonight, you heard something real. And even if you can't share it, can't speak it, can't explain it, it matters. You sleep lightly, like the song is still playing in the back of your mind. You've been waiting for this day for almost a decade. Not in a dramatic, counting the days on the wall kind of way. More like a quiet, aching hope you've carried in your back pocket, checking on it every now and then to make sure it hasn't evaporated. The paperwork was submitted long ago. The bribes were subtle. The signatures took years to gather. But now, here it is, your car. Well, car is generous. It's a Lada. A pale green, slightly uneven, Soviet-born Lada 1200. And it's glorious. The lot outside the dealership looks like a graveyard of squashed bugs. All muted yellows, washed-out browns, the occasional greenish grey. Your Lada stands among them like it belongs, and yet, to you, it might as well be a Cadillac. The man in the leather cap hands you the keys with all the ceremony of someone handing over a used umbrella. "Try not to flood the engine," he mutters. "Cold starts are a gamble." He signs one more form, licks his thumb and stamps it with authority. That's it. You grip the keys in your hand as if they might try to run away. Your cousin claps you on the back. "Let's see if it explodes," he grins. The door creaks open like it hasn't been opened in months, which it probably hasn't. You slide into the seat, which smells faintly of old oil and something suspiciously like celery. The vinyl is cracked. The dashboard is sun-faded. The steering wheel is roughly the size of a dinner plate. You've never been more in love with a hunk of metal in your life. The first turn of the key produces nothing but a grinding cough. The second try, a sputter. On the third, the engine roars to life, wheezing and whining like an asthmatic bear, but running nonetheless. You blink. It actually started. Here's your historical fact. In the Soviet Union, cars were not purchased so much as waited for. Owning a car was a privilege, and required not only money, but years of waiting, connections, or party loyalty. For most, it took between 7 and 10 years from placing an order to finally getting the keys. You pull out of the lot like someone guiding a baby elephant through a museum. Every turn feels dangerous. Every noise is suspicious. But it moves, it goes forward, and that alone feels like a miracle. Your cousin navigates from the passenger seat, leaning out the window occasionally to yell at pedestrians who have no idea you're new to this. "He's fresher," he shouts. "Give him space." You drive through the city slowly, a procession of one. The streets look different from behind the wheel. Less grey, more chaotic. You pass the queue for bread and actually drive past it, which feels borderline disrespectful. You wave to Valera outside the factory. He waves back, mouth agape. At a red light, a man knocks on your window and offers you 3 tins of sardines and a bar of soap in exchange for a ride to the edge of town. You decline gently. You haven't figured out reverse yet. Back home, a small crowd gathers. Children run to circles around the car. The old woman from 3A touches the hood like it's holy. Misha, the jeans kid, nods with respect and says, "Nice wheels, comrade." You pretend not to puff up with pride. You open the trunk, which is slightly smaller than a bread box and smells like damp cardboard. Inside, the car jack is already rusting, and the spare tyre is half deflated. But none of that matters. You have a car, not just any car, your car. You spend the afternoon washing it with water from the Communal tap, using a rag that used to be your cousin's undershirt. The soap is industrial grade, meant for cleaning factory floors, and strips any remaining shine off the paint. But still, it gleams, sort of, if you squint. Here's your quirky fact. Lada owners often formed unofficial clubs, meeting up to share tips on keeping the cars alive. They traded parts like currency and carried entire toolkits in their trunks at all times. Some even named their cars like family pets. You're already thinking of calling yours Arena, or maybe Tankia. That evening you take her, yes, she's already a she, for a proper spin, out toward the Dacha road, past the factory lines, beyond the last tram stop. It's not far, but it's far enough to feel like you've escaped. The road is cracked and muddy, but Arena handles it like a reluctant soldier. You turn up the staticky radio and sing whatever comes through, half a folk song, half a patriotic jingle. Your cousin drums the dash with his fingers, smiling the whole time. Here's your scholarly debate. Did the scarcity of private cars reinforce the ideals of collective society, or simply fuel a culture of longing and quiet rebellion? Some historians say it kept people equal in their limitations. Others argue that car ownership became the ultimate symbol of escaping the collective, a rolling reminder that individual achievement still mattered. You park by a frozen river, engine idling like a tired animal. You both sit in silence, watching the sky bleed from grey to orange. The heat barely works. The windshield wipers creak like a dying violin. But you wouldn't trade this moment for anything. Eventually, you kill the engine and step out into the cold. You pat the hood once, softly. "Good girl," you say. Your cousin rolls his eyes. You sound like a farmer talking to a cow. Back at home, you park Arena with the precision of a man guiding a spaceship into orbit. The neighbours watch from their windows like they're witnessing history. And maybe they are. You head inside, your face numb but your heart buzzing. You peel off your coat and boots, collapse onto the couch, and sigh the sigh of a man who has both arrived and departed in the same day. And somewhere below, parked in the courtyard like a greenish miracle, your car waits. Tomorrow you'll drive to the market, to the factory, maybe even just in circles because you can. It's not just transportation, it's freedom, in third gear, on bald tyres, but still, freedom. You wake up to a crisis, not a dramatic, life-altering one. This isn't that kind of country. No, this is the slow-burning, soul-chipping kind of crisis. You open the cabinet under the sink and find a single square of toilet paper dangling from the roll like it's clinging to hope. You stare at it for a long moment, as if more might magically appear if you just believe hard enough. Your cousin is in the kitchen, buttering a piece of bread with the edge of a knife that's more rust than metal. "Bad news, you say," holding up the cardboard tube like a trophy of defeat. He winces. "We're out completely," you nod. "Completely." He leans back in his chair, rubs his temples, and sighs the sigh of a man facing the full weight of Soviet resource management. "It's going to be a newspaper week, isn't it?" And it might be. You glance at the pile of Pravda stacked in the corner, already earmarked for potato peeling or fire starting, and wonder just how many articles about tractor output you're willing to sacrifice for hygiene. But before you surrender to ink-stained regret, you have one last option. The shop on Lesnaya Street. It's a long shot. The last 3 times you went, they had only vinegar, unidentifiable canned meat and a child's hat. But today could be different. You throw on your coat, tuck a ration coupon into your inner pocket, and prepare for battle. The street is buzzing. Not with excitement, just a low-level anxiety, like everyone knows they're about to be disappointed again, but refuses to admit it. You pass a line of 20 people already coiled outside the bakery. No one knows what they're waiting for. They just are. At the shop, you find the line already curling around the block. You join it without asking questions. That's the rule. If there's a line, you stand in it. You ask what it's for after. If you're lucky, it's something you actually need. If not, well, you've got trading material. After 27 minutes, a man in front of you turns around and whispers, "Toilet paper." Just like that, a 2-word prophecy. You stiffen. Could it be true? Then someone else confirms it. "Said they got a shipment this morning. 2 packs per person. Maybe 3 if you're persuasive." You glance up at the store's peeling sign. Its faded letters hanging on by stubborn bolts. For the first time in your adult life, you feel something close to hope outside a ration line. Here's your historical fact. Throughout the 80s, Soviet citizens often endured shortages of the most basic goods: soap, toothpaste, feminine products, and especially toilet paper. Despite being one of the world's largest economies on paper, the USSR struggled to meet daily consumer needs, leading to long lines and a thriving informal barter system. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights flicker, like they're debating whether to stay on. The shelves are mostly bare, You spot some pickled herring jars stacked in a small pyramid, a box of unlabelled tea bags that smell vaguely of floor cleaner, and a single dusty bottle of cologne with a name that translates loosely to man of industry. But at the counter, there it is, a stack of toilet paper rolls, not wrapped, not scented, not even particularly soft, just coarse utilitarian cylinders of Soviet survival. The woman behind the counter guards them like gold. You hand over your coupon and ask, as politely as possible, if you might have a pack. She eyes you like a prison guard, then sighs, nods, and slides 2 rolls across the counter. They thud like trophies. You thank her, genuinely, maybe too genuinely, and tuck the rolls into your coat. You leave the store walking just slightly taller, like you've won a small war. On the street, people eye your bulging pockets. You nod at them like a man with connections. Here's your quirky fact. Some people used in pages from books, school notebooks, or old ledgers when toilet paper ran out. It was not uncommon to find old encyclopedias stripped down for alternative uses. Many developed elaborate systems of rationing sheets or built special storage to keep their precious stock from vanishing to envious neighbours. You make it home without incident. You burst through the door and toss 1 roll onto the table like you're delivering a rare treasure. Your cousin lets out a whoop and clutches it like a long-lost friend. "I was prepared to use old train schedules," he says solemnly. You hand him the second roll. "Let's never speak of that again." That evening, you both treat yourselves to tea with the last spoonfuls of honey. There's a strange celebratory feeling in the air. Not because life is good, but because it could have been worse, and it wasn't. You sit near the window, sipping slowly, watching the sun dip below the rooftops, casting long shadows across a city built on compromise and coupons. Later, you carefully store the rolls in a tin container you once used for sewing supplies. You tuck it in the highest kitchen cabinet, not for display, for defense. Here's your scholarly debate. Did the persistent scarcity of everyday items contribute to the Soviet population's quiet disillusionment with the system? Some argue that these shortages, more than ideology or foreign policy, eroded public trust. Others claim that scarcity actually built resourcefulness, resilience, and a unique kind of community among those who endured it together. You go to bed that night with the quiet satisfaction of someone who's won a tiny, ridiculous battle against the machinery of the state. Not a revolution, not even a protest. But you have toilet paper. And in this moment that feels like enough. The lights go out with a soft click. The pipes gurgle, your cousin's already snoring, and somewhere in a tin on the top shelf security sleeps softly too. It snows again, because of course it does. Just when you thought the thaw had begun, just when you started to hear the hopeful drip of melting ice from the drain pipes, winter returns like an unwanted house guest who forgot their gloves and came back to stay the month. You wake to the soft hiss of flakes against the window pane, and the unmistakable chill of a radiator that's given up the will to try. Again. You step onto the floor and instantly regret it. Your socks soak up cold like a sponge and whisper betrayal between your toes. Your cousin is already in the kitchen, wrapped in a wool coat and stirring something grey in a pot. "Still snowing? He mutters without looking up. April's a liar. You push grunt in agreement and glance out the window. The world is buried once more in monochrome. Rooftops, trees parked Ladas, all softened into oblivion by a fresh blanket of white. You dress in layers, each one a protective spell against the wind that always finds a way in. Scarf, coat, hat that makes you look like a depressed mushroom. The works. Your boots squelch as you walk, the sole on the left one flapping slightly now, a reminder that nothing lasts forever, especially Soviet footwear. You're not headed to work today. Factory hours have been reduced this week due to a parts shortage. The official explanation is logistical misalignment, which roughly translates to someone somewhere forgot to sign a form and now nothing moves. So instead, you've decided to visit the market, not the state store with its bare shelves and lines stretching like centipedes, but the other market, the one tucked near the train yard, he's sipping, half official, half whispered, where people trade and barter with a speed and efficiency that would terrify bureaucrats. You arrive mid-morning, stomping snow from your boots, and duck into the maze of stalls. The air smells of wet cardboard, smoked fish, and hope. People chatter in low voices, glancing sideways as they haggle over boots, tins of condensed milk, mystery meat, and fabrics that look like they once belonged to a theatre troupe. You spot a man selling apples, actual apples, not the sad, bruised remnants usually offered in state-run produce sections. They are small greenish-yellow, with spots and a smell that makes you think of summer. You approach cautiously. "How much?" you ask. He eyes you. "For you, 2 rubles each, 1 if you have anything to trade." You reach into your bag and pull out your offering, a bar of soap unopened, still faintly fragrant. His eyes widen slightly. Soap is currency. You walk away with 3 apples and the strange thrill of having bartered like a merchant on the Silk Road. Here's your historical fact. Throughout the Soviet era, especially in the late years, informal markets, sometimes called flea markets or tolkuchka, were essential for survival. While technically illegal or semi-legal, these markets allowed citizens to access goods that were unavailable through official channels, often in exchange for other goods or services. You stroll through the market with your apples wrapped in newspaper, peeking into stalls offering everything from old army boots to Polish lipsticks. You see a pair of high heels that seem entirely out of place in a country where the streets are mostly mud and broken cobblestone. A woman nearby is trying on a coat that looks like it might have been part of a circus. She beams in it. And then you see something strange, a man selling snow boots. Perfectly new, the tag still hanging. But the tag is in Finnish. You don't say a word, you just nod respectfully and keep walking. If you ask too many questions, people stop trusting you. Here's your quirky fact. Many Soviet citizens would smuggle foreign goods through the most absurd means, taped to their bodies, stuffed in samovars or sewn into coat linings. Items like chewing gum, pantyhose and ballpoint pens were highly prized and could be exchanged for favours or other rare goods. By the time you leave, your bag holds 2 apples, one already devoured, a used paperback in decent condition, and a small glass jar of pickled mushrooms from a seller who swore they were fresh. You don't believe him, but the label was printed in colour, which is promising. You walk home slowly, snow stinging your cheeks, the weight of your bag oddly comforting. The sidewalks are slick and you almost fall twice. At one point, a kid barrels past you on a makeshift sled made from a suitcase lid. You salute him. He salutes back. Back at your building, the elevator is broken again, which is to say it is still broken, and the repairman has either died or defected. You climb the stairs slowly, carefully, the apples thudding softly in your bag with each step. By the time you reach your floor, your legs are burning, and you feel approximately 97 years old. Your cousin greets you with raised eyebrows and visible skepticism. "You found apples?" he says, like you just returned from a moon landing. You toss him one. He bites into it immediately and winces. "Sour," he mutters. "I love it." You spend the evening reading your new book, an adventure novel set somewhere warm, possibly fictional, and slowly making your way through the mushrooms. They're terrible, but you eat them anyway. The vinegar clears your sinuses. Here's your scholarly debate. Did these informal markets undermine the state's centralised control, or were they a necessary pressure valve that allowed people to function within a failing system? Some scholars argue they were a form of passive resistance, allowing people to assert agency. Others suggest they simply prolonged the inevitable collapse by letting the public self-regulate while pretending things were still working. You go to bed with the book open on your chest, the taste of vinegar still lingering, and your fingers sticky from apple juice. Outside, the snow falls steadily, erasing footprints, softening the edges of the world. The radiator hums weakly back to life. You smile. Not a perfect day, not even a particularly good one. But you have apples, you have pages to turn, and in a country where scarcity is normal, that feels like something close to wealth. It starts with a whisper again, not in the hallway this time, but at the factory, near the water cooler that never actually has water. Just 2 men talking low enough to avoid notice, but not low enough to avoid being overheard. You're standing nearby, pretending to inspect a clipboard that's been blank since Tuesday. Said he saw it. A Coca-Cola sign in the window. You glance up without meaning to. The man speaking catches your eye, then looks away quickly, like he's said too much. But the damage is done. Your mind has already latched onto the word Coca-Cola, like it's an incantation. The American drink. Red cans, swooping letters, bubbles that fizz in Hollywood commercials none of you are supposed to see. You've heard of it, of course, who hasn't? But always in rumours. Stories from returned soldiers, black market traders, people whose cousins once worked at an embassy. It's not real. Not here. Except now, apparently it is. You get the full story from Valera during your lunch break, in a corner of the break room with the light that flickers like a nervous tick. "There's a cafe," he says, lowering his voice even though no one's around. near the river, just opened. Says it's part of the new policy, foreign partnerships, private investors. Word is they've got Western food. You snort. Western food? Like what? Burgers and jazz? Valera shrugs. They've got Coca-Cola. I heard a guy paid 5 rubles for one, drank it in 2 gulps and cried. Here's your historical fact. During the final years of the Soviet Union, especially under Gorbachev's perestroika and glasnost reforms, foreign companies were gradually allowed into the country, symbolising a cautious thaw in the Iron Curtain. Coca-Cola began limited distribution in the USSR in the late 80s, often in special cafes or hotels catering to foreigners and high-ranking officials. The idea haunts you all day, not because you're desperate for soda, but because it represents something more, something fizzy and sweet and forbidden, a liquid symbol of the world beyond your closed borders, something not processed through 1,000 party filters. That evening you skip the tram and walk. It's a long way to the riverside. Especially in melting snow, but your feet carry you faster than your brain can offer objections. The sky is a dull bruise, the air full of slush and soot. You pass shuttered kiosks, graffiti that reads "Freedom, it's chaos," and a group of teenagers gathered around a boombox blasting Western pop. And then you see it. A small cafe nestled between a bookstore and an electronics shop that hasn't sold a working television in years. There's nothing special, yellow awning, fogged up windows, but above the door in bright undeniable red, Coca-Cola, in English, in the real swooping font. You freeze. It feels like time skips a beat. Inside, the place is buzzing, not loud, just alive in a way Soviet spaces usually aren't. Western music plays softly through speakers. People talk with animated hands and lean too close to one another, like they're afraid the moment might dissolve if they don't clutch it. The menu is short. Some sandwiches, coffee, a few desserts with suspiciously English names. But there it is, behind the counter. A refrigerator with a glass door, and inside it, row after row of Coca-Cola bottles. Real ones, red labels. The whole myth, sweating quietly behind the glass. You step forward like a pilgrim approaching a shrine. The woman behind the counter doesn't even blink. "1 bottle?" she asks. You nod, hand already fishing in your pocket for rubles. It costs more than a bus ride, more than lunch, but you pay it. She hands you the bottle, and for a second you just stare at it. The cap is shiny. The label is slightly crooked. It's ice cold. You unscrew the top, and it hisses softly. You take a sip. Here's your quirky fact. The first mass bottling of Coca-Cola in the USSR took place during the 1980 Moscow Olympics, but only for foreign athletes and journalists. For regular citizens, it remained mythical until the late 80s, when Gorbachev's reforms cracked the door open to Western businesses. It's good, not perfect, sweet, fizzy, slightly medicinal. You're not even sure it lives up to the legend, but it doesn't matter. Because right now, you're standing in a Soviet cafe holding a symbol of the West and nobody's arresting you for it. You sit at a small table near the window. The condensation on the glass blurs the city outside, makes it look softer, less concrete. You sip slowly, stretching each swallow like it's a poem. Nearby, a couple shares a slice of something called American pie, giggling like they've discovered a secret language. Someone is reading Time magazine, in English, just flipping through it, free as you please. Here's your scholarly debate. Did the arrival of Western products signal the beginning of meaningful openness in Soviet life? Or were they simply distractions, cosmetic freedoms used to pacify the restless without truly changing the system? Some say these goods sparked imagination, igniting a desire for more. Others argue they were shallow tokens, imported sugar coating on a still rusting machine. You finish your Coke and stare at the bottle. It's just glass and syrup and sugar. But for a moment it tasted like another world. A free world. A messy, loud, overpriced world, but one where people didn't have to whisper about wanting something different. On the walk home, you save the bottle. You rinse it in the sink and place it on the shelf next to your tea canisters. Your cousin raises an eyebrow when he sees it. "You paid how much for that?" he asks. You shrug. "It was worth it." He eyes it for a long time. "You going to drink it?" "I did." He smiles a little. "Then it was worth it." That night you sit by the window with your tea, plain Soviet, grey as dishwater, and stare at the red label catching the light. You still live in the USSR. The rules haven't changed. The walls are still there, but maybe the windows are starting to open. You don't get a phone call, you get a knock. It's just after dinner, cashier again, thin and forgettable, and you're sitting with your cousin playing cards at the kitchen table. He's winning, as always, grinning over a lousy hand like it's poker in Las Vegas. The knock is quiet but sharp. 2 raps, deliberate. You freeze with a jack of spades halfway to the table. You both go still. The thing is, no one knocks on your door without warning. If it's a neighbour, they shout your name first. If it's family, they barge in. And if it's something official, well, they don't knock gently. You walk to the door slowly, every step echoing in your skull. You press your eye to the peephole. There's a man in a grey coat standing in the hallway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Open up," he says, not loud, not aggressive, just inevitable. You do. "Your papers," he says, holding up a badge you don't fully see. You hand them over without blinking. He flips through them with one hand, eyes skimming fast. Then he says the words that shift the air in the room. "You've been selected for an interview." Your cousin stands behind you now, silent, no jokes, no smirking. You both know what this could be, but it isn't what you expect. An hour later, you're sitting in a fluorescent-lit office that smells faintly of boiled cabbage and floor wax. The man in the grey coat sits across from you, holding a folder with your name typed on it in uneven Cyrillic. He doesn't open it. Instead, he says, "Tell me about your education." You blink. The questions come fast. Your factory record, your attendance at party meetings, your language skills. He nods at your answers like he's checking boxes only he can see. Then he leans back and says, "There's a new program, internal candidates only, administrative, we need people with literacy." He says that last word like it's a rare mineral. You don't respond right away. He notices. "You've been noticed," he adds, more gently than expected. "No complaints, no marks, clean file. That's rare these days." You stare at him. You weren't expecting a promotion, not even a minor one. You were expecting a warning, or a question about the black market soap, or the suspicious receipt you found in your cousin's coat, not a desk job. And yet, here's your historical fact. In the late Soviet period, internal surveillance expanded beyond punishing dissent. It was also used to identify reliable citizens for mid-level bureaucratic roles. These jobs, safe, indoors, tied to paperwork, were considered a step up from manual labour, and often came with modest perks like better rations or occasional travel. You leave the office dazed, your mind racing. The idea of a desk job sounds both thrilling and terrifying. Less noise, fewer blisters, maybe even access to a working phone. You get home and collapse into a chair. Your cousin stares at you, holding a piece of stale bread like a cigarette. "You got recruited, didn't you?" he asks. You nod. He whistles low. "Well, now you'll be one of them." "I think I already was," you say. You sleep badly that night. Not because you're afraid, not really, but because you don't know what comes next. The job, whatever it is, feels like a door cracking open. The question is, does it lead out or further in? The next day you report to your new position. Department of Inventory Documentation, Regional Branch Office, number 12. A mouthful of a name for a room with 2 desks, 1 filing cabinet, and an elderly woman named Ludmila who smells like talcum powder and has been there since Khrushchev. She shows you the ropes. It's mostly forms, triplicate reports, stamps, so many stamps. You're handed a rubber stamp on your first day like it's a Medal of Honor. And it's peaceful, that's the strangest part. You sit by a window, you drink tea that doesn't taste like despair. You listen to Ludmila hum war songs while she organises folders by mood. You aren't being yelled at. You aren't freezing in an unheated workshop. You're inside. Here's your quirky fact. Soviet bureaucratic offices were notorious for bizarre paperwork rituals. Some stamps were so sacred they had to be locked up each night. Whole documents could be rejected for being typed on the wrong colour paper or missing the appropriate signature of an official who'd been dead for 3 months. You start to learn the patterns. Who likes their forms in blue ink? Who writes too small? Which departments send half-filled reports and hope no one notices? You begin correcting small errors, then big ones. Ludmila watches you like a proud grandmother. "You're wasted on machines," she tells you. After 2 weeks you receive your first official perk. A voucher for a pair of decent shoes. Not flashy, not Western, but warm and made with soles that won't disintegrate in snow. You bring them home like a trophy. Your cousin lifts them out of the bag, inspects them and says, "Well, well, citizen of the month." You roll your eyes but don't argue. It feels good. Here's your scholarly debate. Were small promotions within the Soviet system a true reward for loyalty? or a subtle method of co-opting intelligent citizens, pulling them deeper into the very bureaucracy that kept the system intact. Some historians argue these roles dulled dissent. Others suggest they provided just enough autonomy to keep things functioning. You settle into your new routine. Paper, tea, more paper. Your life becomes ruled by margins and stamps and the quiet pleasure of a report filed properly. And yet part of you feels like you've stepped into a fog. You're not sure if you're rising or sinking, but you do your work, you drink your tea, you stare out the window and wonder if the future looks anything like the orderly forms on your desk. Time has begun to blur a little. You find yourself measuring life not in seasons or months, but in stamps used, folders filed, and how many teaspoons of tea you can sneak from the communal tin before someone notices. The office, for all its faded paint and occasional radiator sputters, becomes something of a sanctuary. Predictable, beige, and blessedly warm. You sit by the window now, still with Ludmila at her desk, still humming the same 3 war songs like they're stuck in her bones. You're halfway through retyping a requisition form for light bulbs when something unusual happens. The door opens, and in walks a man in a blazer. That's not the strange part. It's his shoes. Clean. Imported maybe. Shiny in a way that says, "I don't walk in mud." He doesn't look at you, just hands Ludmila a folder, says something you can't hear, and leaves. But she goes pale. That is unusual. Ludmila doesn't go pale for anything, not even mouldy kasha or broken typewriters. She stares at the folder like it's ticking. Then slowly, she slides it over to you. Your name is on it. Inside a travel order to Moscow. You blink at the page, then at her. "Is this a joke?" you ask. Ludmila shakes her head, presses her lips tight. "You've been called up in action training. 3 weeks, don't be late. You reread the form. You're not being transferred. Not exactly, you're being prepared. Whatever that means." Here's your historical fact. In the final decade of the Soviet Union, bureaucratic apparatuses began shifting rapidly. Gorbachev's reforms meant that many departments were suddenly trying to retrain or reassign reliable employees, either to modernize the system or in some cases tighten control under the appearance of reform. Your cousin reacts exactly how you expect. "Moscow," he says, spoon midair. "They don't just send people to Moscow unless it's for surgery or secrets. You pack anyway." You borrow a suitcase from a neighbour, polish your new shoes until they look almost scandalous, and iron your shirt 3 times. You even dig out that old tie, the one from your cousin's wedding, stiff as cardboard and slightly mustard-stained. The train station smells like wet concrete and boiled eggs, as it always does. You board the night train with a dozen others, all equally confused and all equally quiet. No one talks much, you're all reading the same form, trying to read between the same bureaucratic lines. The journey is long, rhythmic, and oddly comforting. You share your compartment with a man from Leningrad, who claims to have once owned a working refrigerator, and a woman from Tula, who quietly weaves a pair of mittens from old yarn while humming a lullaby. You sleep with your coat folded under your head, the train rocking you gently through the blackness. When you arrive, Moscow is grey, monumental, intimidating. It feels like walking into a history book written in cement and ambition. Everything in is big. Buildings stretch upward like they're challenging the sky. The streets buzz with movement, taxis, buses, people in coats that look newer, better, somehow cleaner. You feel underdressed and overawed. Your assigned dormitory is clean but sterile. You're given a badge, a schedule, and a binder, labelled Internal Oversight Fundamentals. It's as dry as week-old bread and twice as dense. You sit in a room with 30 others, all of you nodding along as a man in a pale grey suit lectures about form efficiency, paper flow management, and something called performance realignment metrics, a phrase so abstract it might as well be sorcery. Here's your quirky fact: Soviet bureaucratic training often relied on role-play simulations that mimicked Western business models, despite being deeply rooted in a system that couldn't function like those models. Many trainees referred to the sessions as acting out capitalism badly. Despite the jargon, the rules are clear: learn to watch, learn to notice. Not just who stamps forms incorrectly, but who whispers too often, who drinks during lunch, who disagrees quietly. You're being trained not just in paperwork, but in people. It becomes clear by the second week that this isn't about inspections, it's about loyalty, control, knowing where the cracks are in the wall and who's leaning a little too hard on them. You don't report anyone, of course not, but you learn how they want you to see. You write the reports with vague language, cautious adjectives. Ludmila would be proud. You never name names, but you describe patterns, you learn the dance, and slowly they nod at you more often. You're not climbing, you're gliding. Here's your scholarly debate. Was bureaucratic surveillance in the Soviet Union about genuine belief in the system's integrity, or simply the result of self-preservation? Many officials navigated the fine line between compliance and complicity, often unsure themselves whether they were enforcing rules or just surviving within them. One evening after a long lecture on integrity reporting models, you find yourself walking alone near Red Square. It's late, the air is sharp, the buildings glow under cold streetlights like they're trying to remember glory. You sit on a bench and sip from a thermos of weak tea. A group of tourists passes behind you, laughing in a language you don't recognise. Their jackets are colourful. Everything about them seems loose, unburdened. You envy them. In your pocket, your badge rests heavy and warm from your hand. You're not sure what it means anymore. Opportunity? Watchfulness? Danger? You finish the tea and stand. The wind pushes against your coat. You head back to the dorm, your boots clicking on the wet pavement. You're in Moscow now, not as a visitor, not as a dreamer, but as someone the machine has noticed and started to use. You're not sure whether to be honoured or afraid. Moscow changes you. Not in some cinematic sweeping way where you return home transformed and wise, but subtly, like a coat that wears smooth around the elbows over time. At first, you feel out of place. You talk too slowly, you dress like the provinces, and you blink too long at subway escalators that seem to descend into forever. But the city doesn't care, it never has, it just keeps moving. And so you move with it. By the third week of your training, which feels less like education and more like gentle indoctrination, you know how to blend in. You know which lunch lady gives extra soup if you compliment her earrings, which hallway smells like wet cement because the pipes always leak, and how to write a report that says something without really saying anything. You're learning the art of the in-between, not lying, not truth-telling, just describing carefully. You eat breakfast in the same seat every morning, second table from the window where the radiator sometimes works and the coffee is less terrible. And every morning you watch the same man walk by the glass door wearing a blue scarf and carrying a briefcase that never opens. He never comes in, he just passes, like clockwork. You don't know why this comforts you, it just does. The binder they gave you is nearly full now. You've completed every assignment, every test, even a mock interrogation exercise that made your skin crawl. You played the role of data analyst, while another trainee was asked to explain why his productivity rating dropped. He claimed a death in the family. You were told to flag emotional volatility. You wrote, "Recommendation, allow additional leave but monitor tone in future debriefings." And that was the correct answer. Here's your historical fact. In the final years of the Soviet Union, administrative trainings increasingly emphasized behavioral monitoring as the economy began to destabilize. Paperwork became a mechanism not just for organization, but for psychological profiling, subtly preparing mid-level workers to become the system's eyes and ears. Your final assignment comes folded in an envelope with a red stripe across the top. Not quite sealed, but not casual either. You're instructed to shadow a regional inspector named Ivanovich. He doesn't smile. He doesn't even look at you directly. He just hands you a clipboard and says, "Take notes. Don't speak unless spoken to." You follow him through a textile plant where the air is thick with lint and the workers blink too much. Ivanovich points out the flaws in the machinery, the misplaced safety signage, the unswept corners. He says nothing about the fact that one of the looms is clearly being operated by a teenager well under legal working age. You scribble, but you don't ask. That's not the test. Later, over watery borscht in the commissary, he leans in and says, "You see more with your mouth closed, remember that." You nod like it's wisdom, but inside you feel hollow, not afraid, just distant. That night you lie awake in your dorm bunk, staring at the ceiling tiles that all look slightly misaligned. You think of your cousin, probably asleep with a book over his face. You think of Ludmila, who would hate Moscow with every fibre of her talcum-dusted soul. You think of her, the girl from the library, though it's been weeks since your last letter. You haven't had time to write back, or maybe you've just been unsure what you'd say. "Hi, I'm learning how to write reports that could ruin someone's life. How are the parks? You didn't ask for this opportunity, but here it is, like a heavy coat you didn't know you'd have to wear. Here's your quirky fact. Some Soviet trainees would deliberately fail certain parts of their evaluations in the hopes of being dismissed from surveillance-adjacent roles. Others sabotaged their own paperwork by including subtle jokes or incorrect statistics, little acts of bureaucratic rebellion that usually went unnoticed, but gave them small thrills. On your final day, you're called into a wood-panelled office and handed a new badge. Your name is printed in embossed letters, and under it, the word Oversight Liaison. The title means nothing to anyone outside the building, but inside it signals that you've been vetted, trusted, chosen. You sign a non-disclosure form. You're told, this role requires discretion, loyalty, stability. You nod. Of course. You return to your dorm and stare at the badge for a long time. It's heavier than the old one. It even smells different, like metal and fresh ink. You slip it into your pocket and pour yourself a cup of the bitter coffee that still tastes like cardboard, but this time you drink the whole cup without flinching. Here's your scholarly debate. Did roles like liaisons or inspectors exist to preserve the state, or simply to give the illusion of oversight as the system decayed from within? Some researchers argue these positions were more about optics than action, creating a sense of control without actually improving anything. Others believe they laid the groundwork for the bureaucratic overreach that contributed to the USSR's eventual unraveling. You leave Moscow at dawn, riding the train back through fog and frozen fields, your badge zipped tightly inside your coat. No one on the train knows what it means. You don't offer the information. You sleep lightly and wake each time the train slows down, always halfway between a dream and the next task. When you return to your home city, the snow is mostly gone. The sky is still grey, the streets still cracked, but everything feels slightly smaller now, or maybe you feel slightly larger. Not in a proud way, just aware, like someone who's peeked behind the curtain and isn't sure what to do with what they saw. Ludmila welcomes you back with a kiss on the cheek and a fresh stack of folders. You'll need a new drawer, she says. You're important now, she says it teasingly, but you know she's right. You sit at your desk, pull out a blank form and begin typing. You still live here. You still drink the tea, stamp the papers, nod when expected, but now the system sees you differently. And whether that's safety or danger, you're not sure yet. The days go on. They don't change so much as unfold, like a newspaper you've already read a dozen times but keep checking in case something new appears between the lines. You wake, you dress, you stamp, you nose and you nod. You will return. That's the rhythm now, that's the melody. Life in triplicate. But something's shifting. Not in you, you've already shifted. It's the world around you. At first it's little things. A neighbour who starts whispering about prices going up again, not with fear, but with open disgust. A vendor at the market who refuses to accept ration coupons and wants hard rubles only. A line outside the post office that doesn't lead to anything because the telegram clerk quit mid-shift and simply never came back. The others didn't either. People are tired. Not angry, not yet, but tired in a deeper way, like their bones are done believing. You sit at your desk with Ludmila, who seems to feel it too. Her humming has stopped lately. She clicks her pen now, like she's trying to keep time with something she can't hear. She passes you a form without looking. Another closure, she says. Factory on Pushkin Street. They say it's temporary. You flip through the papers. They look like all the others, but instead of insufficient output, the reason is lack of materials. You've seen those words more often lately. They're code for we have nothing left to give. Here's your historical fact. By the late 90s, the Soviet Union was buckling under the weight of its own system. Economic stagnation, mounting debt, and declining production led to widespread shortages. Food, soap, even basic goods like matches disappeared from stores, often without explanation. You start noticing the empty shelves more. The way people peer inside shops like they're looking for ghosts. The chalkboards that used to list prices now just say no delivery or come tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes. And people are starting to talk. Not in secret corners anymore, but right out in the open. You pass a group of old men at the park bench. The same ones who used to trade newspaper clippings and argue over football. And now they're discussing glasnost like it's a neighbourhood rumour. Did you see the articles? One says. That writer, what's his name? He actually said the system's broken. He'll vanish, the other replies. No, says the first. That's the thing. He won't. You walk faster. Then come the meetings. Not inspections, not briefings, meetings. You're called in with other liaisons, other inspectors, other mid-level nobodies who are now somebodies. A young man from the Central Committee reads from a note that's clearly been revised 30 times. "We are entering a new phase," he says. "Public trust must be maintained." Then he uses words like dialogue, transition, and the very strangest of all, openness. You're told to listen more, to record less, to report only extreme cases. The rules are changing, or they're unraveling. You're not sure which. Here's your quirky fact. When censorship began to loosen in the late 80s, many Soviet newspapers and TV programs flooded with sudden honesty. Long-buried disasters, corruption, and state failures were discussed openly for the first time. Some citizens thought it was a trick. Others just sat in silence, stunned. You get home one night to find your cousin staring at the television, not sleeping, not faking it, just watching. "Turn it up," you say. He doesn't move. It's already as loud as it gets. You sit beside him. On the screen, a man is standing at a podium, speaking calmly, carefully. He talks about change, about truth, about rebuilding, not just slogans, actual sentences. The studio audience doesn't clap. They just watch, like you do. When it's over, your cousin leans forward, elbows on knees. "What do you think?" he asks. You shake your head. "I don't know yet." The next morning, a letter arrives. Not the typed kind from your department. Not the folded directives you've gotten used to. A real letter. In pen. From her. You open it slowly. She writes about the library. About a shipment of books that arrived without covers, pages falling out but still full of meaning. She writes about teaching poetry to children who've only ever memorized factory hymns. She writes simply, "Something is opening." And at the bottom, one line. Are you still on the inside looking out, or have you started looking in? You fold the letter and tuck it in your coat. Here's your scholarly debate. Did glasnost and perestroika truly reflect a shift in Soviet ideology, or were they last-ditch efforts to preserve power through reform? Some argue Gorbachev sought genuine change. Others believe the system was too compromised to survive, and reform only hastened the collapse. The next day you go to work and find Ludmila already at her desk, but not working. Just sitting there, staring out the window with a strange expression. "They're closing another one," she says. "The bakery on Vavilov. Said it's being restructured." You nod. "I used to buy rolls there in 62, she adds. "They were awful, but warm." Later, you're asked to write an internal memo about morale. You sit in front of the typewriter for a long time. Then you write, "Morale is difficult to measure when the measure keeps changing." You don't stamp it. You fold it, slide it into a drawer and go for a walk. Outside, the air smells like thawing asphalt. Somewhere in the distance, someone's playing a cassette too loudly. Western music, guitar and all. A group of students marches past holding handwritten signs, no slogans, just questions. You don't read them all, you just keep walking. You don't feel fear anymore. You feel weightless, like the rules have lost their gravity, and you're floating above a country that used to hold you so tightly it nearly squeezed you out. You still live here. But now something else is beginning. Not revolution, not collapse, something in between. So now you're lying in bed, right where this whole thing started. Just a little older, a little more folded around the edges, maybe with one or two more quiet secrets stacked beneath your pillow. The radiator gives its familiar stutter, coughing like an old man in the corner. Outside, the street lamp flickers once, then holds steady. You pull the blanket higher. The country hasn't collapsed. Not yet. But the cracks are spiderwebbing faster than anyone can patch them. People speak their minds now sometimes. Books arrive with pages intact. Foreign songs float from cassette decks with less caution. Coca-Cola is sold in actual stores, not just behind whispers. There's still a queue, of course. There will always be a queue. But now the queue ends in something you actually want. At least half the time. In the corner of the room, your cousin snores softly, clutching a pillow that's lost all structural integrity. He's still himself, sharp-tongued and surprisingly tender in the ways that don't use words. You've kept your job more or less. You stamp fewer forms now, you talk more, listen more, ask questions, sometimes even out loud. That girl from the library writes once a month. The letters are shorter now, lighter. Once she signed it, "See you sooner than we thought." You haven't seen her yet, but you believe her. Your Lada, Irina of course, still starts most mornings, though she rattles like an accordion and eats oil for breakfast. You drive her to the edge of the city sometimes, just to sit by the trees and Pretend you're somewhere without borders. She's not freedom, but she's motion. And that's enough. No one really knows what's coming. The news changes weekly. The old men in the park still argue, but now they argue about democracy and vouchers instead of which party secretary wore a better suit in 1973. You hear talk of independence from the Baltics, protests in Georgia, new currencies, broken spoons. It's as if the whole country is exhaling for the first time, and no one's quite sure what to do with all the air. You close your eyes and think about beet soup and ration cards and underground prayers and that first sip of Coca-Cola. You think about the silence of snowy courtyards and the laughter that bubbles up anyway. You think about survival not as an act of desperation, but as a rhythm, a heartbeat, and as the hum of the radiator fades into the hush of the night, you drift. Not back to the past, not forward into the unknown, but sideways, into a place where memory softens, and time forgets to march, and the questions don't need answers just yet. Sleep now. You've been through the whole thing, the waiting, the noise, the bureaucracy, the little rebellions that looked like nothing but meant everything. You made it. You stayed human, and no matter what happens next, that's more than enough.